It's good to have my family here tonight. Good to have so many friends and good neighbors here, and welcome as we call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Jenks City Council. Today is Tuesday, May 18th of 2021. The time is 6 p.m. My name is Corey Box, and I will be your chairman for this night's proceedings. It appears we have all of our members present. This is Brandon Macy, our city clerk, and he will verify our attendance.
Murray? Here. Klein? Present. Short? Here. OJ?
Here.
Kaylin? Here. Isabel? Here. Airbox? Here.
We are called to order at 6 p.m. Tonight's invocation is courtesy of Monsignor Patrick Gallus. My apologies, sir, and you are from St. Bernard's Church, is that correct? Just across the river in Tulsa? I was in your church about 3 weeks ago, right, honey? Unfortunately for a funeral service, but it was good to meet you. Please come forward and lead us in prayer.
This is the first verse of Psalm 127. Unless the Lord build the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guard the city, in vain does the guard keep vigil. Let us pray. Dear Lord, our city council asks for your blessing. Aid them with your grace, so that in building the earthly city, they may always be mindful of the poor and of the dwelling you are preparing for each of us in that city not made with human hands, the new and eternal Jerusalem. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. And please join me, remain standing as we pledge allegiance to our United States flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, we'll open the floor to any citizens' comments. If you have not made citizens' comments before, please be aware that you're welcome to comment on anything you want, as long as it is not an agenda item for this evening. Any citizens' comments? Okay, thank you very much. We do have something on the agenda. It's a little unannounced. Is he here? Bart, is he coming? No. Okay. You want to? Okay. Why don't we let it roll for a while? Then if he comes, we'll work it in as the first opportunity. Are you okay with that? Councilor Lynn?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll do that. Okay, business item number 1, consideration and appropriate action relating to requests for approval of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I think we are planning on pulling item number D to be discussed.
That is correct, sir. Would you like to make that motion?
Yes, I'd like to make that motion, please.
Okay. Do we have a second?
So I second, sorry.
We have a proper motion and a proper second to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item D. Let's vote, please.
Murray? Yes. Klein?
Yes.
Short?
Yes.
OJ?
Yes.
Kaylin?
Yes.
Isabel? Yes. Airbox?
Yes. Item D is consideration and possible approval, denial, amendment, and/or revision of recommendation of the final plat of Torrey Lakes, general location between 131st and 141st Street on Harvard. This is page 57 if you're fortunate enough to have one of our packets tonight. At this particular point, we wanted to kind of open the floor to let both parties give us some last minute thoughts and comments. Mrs. Hilton, you do not wish to lead the discussion, is that correct? Okay. Okay. So why don't we start off with Mr. and Mrs. Pinkston, if you are Please come forward, state your name and address for the record, please, sir.
Greg Pinkston. So I had you just turn the mic on.
Yeah, make sure that mic is on.
Okay, got a green light now.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Greg Pinkston, 2701 East 138th Place South.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor.
Did you guys have an opportunity, Brandon, to? Yes, I did. Thank you very much. Well, a lot of today's discussion around this is going to be centered around Jenks City's Ordinance number 1206. And this ordinance covers several topics, things like stormwater drainage, pollution, hazardous materials, so on. And you're going to hear terms like pre-development flow rate, post-development flow rates, things like that. Ultimately, what I want to make sure we understand is that the purpose of this ordinance is to protect people downstream from what happens upstream. Now, I'm not an engineer. Thankfully, I've got a father-in-law who is and understands those things much better than I do. But as a dad, a husband, I can tell you what my experience has been since this started. So because there are new members of the council, I'll go back a little bit. Back in 2007, we purchased our property and sat on it for about 5 years, just waiting to see what would happen. We knew there was a drainage easement across the property. We lived just a few miles away and we thought, well, let's see what happens on this drainage. We decided to build a home there. And every time there was a big rain, we drive by, take a look, what's happening in the easement. And we saw that when there was a rain, sure enough, water would flow through the easement. A few days later, it would dry up and go back to normal. So we decided after 5 years of that, watching that this was a great place to build our home. So in 2012, we built our home and graded the easement, sodded it, very gentle slope. Matter of fact, you can see in the top picture of your handout, this picture was in 2016. So it's about 4 years after us living on the property. The easement still has a very gentle slope to it. Grass is growing just the way it was designed when we first moved in. However, since the construction of Tory Lakes has begun, our easement has seen water consistently running through it, which causes erosion, damage to the property. Though the bottom half of that document, you can see pictures of the actual easement today. These pictures were taken in the last couple of weeks. Water stands in parts of it, flows throughout it, and a rut has now been cut through the property. Now, we brought our concerns to the city beginning in April of last year. And each time that we brought concerns up to the city engineering staff, we've heard one of two things: either that we have nothing to fear, or that your concerns were with the developer, not with the city. Those are the two common responses we've gotten. And I'd like to reference May 7th in a city council staff report. Marseille, am I saying your name right? Marseille, thank you. Marseille Hilton, you commented on that report. It says it is unlawful to cause adverse impact to surrounding properties. The engineer of record conducts modeling to understand post and pre-construction discharge rates, or publicly speaking, where a drop of water on the property goes presently, that's where we'll go following development. So we walked away from that understanding there's nothing that can be done that will damage our property. So we're nothing to fear. But unfortunately, as time went on and development started, we saw, which you're seeing in the pictures, that we did have something to be concerned about. So what we saw next was the developer's hydrology report. Now, this is a report that the developer submits to the city engineers to say, here's how much water is currently going through prior to development, and here's how much will come to this point after development. On that hydrology report, it showed that at what's called a 5-year rain event that would happen approximately every 5 years. It's an approximation. But in one of these 5-year rain events, not only would the pipe that connects our property to the property behind us, the field behind us, not only would that pipe fill up, it would overflow the berm over that. Well, we've owned the property since 2007. Several of these events, rain events, have happened to this degree, and never has that occurred, which made us question, well, it sounds like what they're saying has been happening, has not been happening from our perspective. We have not observed that. So we asked the city at that point to conduct an independent hydrology report. Don't just take the developer's hydrology. Let's run one for the city. You guys decide what pre-development looks like. And the city engineers declined to do that. So at our own expense, we hired a hydrologist, independent party, no one related to us in any way, a third party, and asked them to run a hydrology report. And his report included what we were seeing, which is the pre-development flow rate that they were indicating was higher than what our actual experience was. Now, Unfortunately, that hydrologist wasn't able to be at the meeting tonight. We asked him to be, but he submitted this statement. And I'll just read his statement verbatim. Mr. Macy, who's writing this to Mr. Macy here, I'm unable to attend the city council meeting tonight due to a previous conflict meeting at our church. The Pinkstons and Mr. Dale Riley, that's my father-in-law, requested my presence. But since I'm unable to attend in person, I respectfully am submitting the following statements as a professional engineer hydrologist on behalf of the Pinkstons from my engineering report and from the memo documenting the subsequent meeting in the city of Jenks, or with the city of Jenks, TEP Engineering and myself. His independent opinion is as follows. While the specific flows in the modeling performance by His Inc. LLC, that's his company, are less for each condition than those presented in the TEP report, it is our opinion that there is an increase in stormwater runoff when comparing existing and project conditions with Tory Lakes development in place at a point of discharge onto the Pinkston's property through the existing 24-inch culvert and across their property in the natural channel. Now, as a part of this process, we knew what our experience with the property was. And since 2007, we had never seen water come over that berm, fill that pipe, anything like that. But that was only our experience. So we questioned the developer of our property who owned the land back to 1998. And we were able to get a signed affidavit from him stating that his experience with the property matched ours. That when there was rain, sure enough, water would run through the easement. It would dry up in a few days. That since 1998, the water had never filled that pipe and certainly never come over the berm into that property. So conversations with the city, anytime we presented this information, resulted with, you're going to have to take that up with the developer. Conversations with the developer would be, we've done everything the city has asked us to do. And I believe they probably have. That's why my conflict is with the city, allowing this to happen. So we proposed a possible solution to the city. We asked, could we install a drain pipe that would take this water instead of overground, underground, eliminate the erosion? And the city engineer responded, and this is a quote from an email that he sent me on January 18th. The city will not require the developer to put it in, and the city will not pay to have the system designed or installed either. Now, what's interesting about that is that was on Monday, January the 18th. Tuesday, January 19th was a city council meeting, at which point Mr. Cloyd presented to the city council a statement indicating that he was still working with us on a solution. And so you had asked him about the 2.5 table. Mm-hmm. Now, my wife and I were shocked when he said he was still working with us, because the day before we got an email saying, we will not implement this, we will not require the developer to do it. We thought that was the end of the conversation. So recently, we've got an estimate from a landscaping company to figure out what would it take to get our property back to the way it was designed, what you see on the top of your attachment. He said it'd be around $6,000 to $8,000 to regrade the property, resod it. But the problem is the water's still running. So any work we do is only going to temporarily solve the problem because the water continually flows. So we'd be looking at that $6,000 to $8,000 in another couple of years, year and a half, 2 years. And that erosion will just continue, and we would just keep resetting it if we let the water continue to flow over ground. So what we're asking the city council to do today, what I'm asking you to do, is hold the city responsible. I'm asking you to hold them responsible for the damage that's happened since the city allowed this construction to happen. It's not only a nuisance. Now when the boys are playing ball in the backyard, instead of you want to get the baseball out of the ditch, they're getting it out of a creek. But it's causing financial damage to our family as well. And we would like to ask that Tory Lake's final plat approval be tabled until the city is able to come up with a proposed solution and timeline for that solution. That's what we're asking. So, thank you very much.
Any questions from council on the right for Mr. Pinkston before you? Any questions on the left from council for Mr. Pinkston? I guess we're ready to hear from, thank you, sir. Ready to hear from the representative of Tory Lakes. Is that the plan? Thank you. Good evening, sir. If you just have your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Russ Fisher, Tulsa Engineering. I live at 8734 East 113th in Dixie.
Thank you, sir.
I am the project engineer for the Tory Lake subdivision. The number of comments that Mr. Pinkston has brought up needs some clarification in that hydrology is not a basic study. It's quite different from when you put in the water lines and the sanitary. Hydrology takes quite a bit of experience to understand all the nuances of what makes a storm event. The 5-year reference that was mentioned is all based on probability from records that the National Weather Service has provided. And all these are criteria elements that have been long established in the city of Jenks development criteria, along with subdivision regulations. Both have been in place for a number of years. The design criteria manual is well over 10 years old, and it has served the city well. Tulsa Engineering is a firm that has been around for 40 years. We have done a number of subdivisions in the city of Jenks. We have followed that criteria, and while each city's criteria is unique to the city, it kind of depends on who was involved in finalizing the details of it. They're pretty typical across the metro area of things you look at, things you take in consideration. And a basis is that you do look at existing conditions. It is very typical in this manner that this was a pasture land. Typically, when you're doing a subdivision, you'll be dealing with pasture or hay ground. And so it's a change from what it currently is to something that will have streets and rooftops, and there is a change. And one of the things that is a common denominator in hydrology, whether you're doing subdivision work or whether you're doing commercial work, is the concept of no adverse impact. And this is a long established concept. And while it may be determined by someone living downstream that what is an adverse impact, is it different? Is something changed from what was? And that's often the case. When we had our meeting with the Pinkston's engineer, Bill Smith, we met at the city engineering offices, and it was the engineering staff, Bill Smith, and then myself, and we were talking about the elements and what is no adverse impact. And while anyone who's worked in hydrology, dealt with FEMA, dealt with the various cities, you're going to know what this is about. And it does not mean that there is no change. You can't ever make something that was 40 acres of a hayfield be exactly the same as what you have to now have a detention pond to lower that runoff. And it is a point source discharge versus something that is sheet flow. So it can't ever be exactly the same. We work really hard to make it so that it is very similar. And again, no adverse impact. The thing you're looking at, have you dramatically changed the amount of runoff that comes on? Particularly, you look at the storm events. Typically, 100-year is looked at. Various cities will have you look at lesser years. And what we've looked at with the city of Jenks is that we've really focused on 5-year, which is the lowest storm event that is called out. So looking at the low flow, because you do look at a lower flow, a 5-year event, which really is a 20% storm event of occurring versus 100-year. 100-year is, of course, a 1% storm and is pretty much a standard of a really heavy event. And these are all based off of probability and statistics. And when you have these events, and in order to emulate what was, and so we gather up per criteria that we have a storm sewer collection system, you go into a detention pond, and the key word there is detention, that you detain, you hold back flow, and you dampen that effect so that it's not a big surge that comes through, you hold it back and you release it. And so it's going to be different in that it's going to release a longer period of time So it's not going to be exactly the same. And one of the things that we were all talking about is that we believe the Pinkstons view it as that there would be no absolute change. And the amount of time frame that they talk about, I have not been out there. The latest time, or the furthest time out that I was at the site was October, when we met out there the very first time. Councilman Murray was there, and we were standing at the point discharge. And at that time, the ditch was dry. It didn't look as lush and green. It's October. You're under trees. There's a lot of bare ground. We have pictures of those days. It does not look a thing like the top picture. It was October. Bermuda's not growing much, but there's a lot of bare ground. The other part that we were talking about at the engineering meeting is that this is going to behave quite differently, in that there's going to be some low flow events that may dribble out as the detention pond empties out. We also have areas, because there's a significant amount of the area drainage basin that is undeveloped. And so there's some existing a farm pond, and then there's a sump. And those are going to hold some water from any storm event, and that's going to slowly dribble out. It also appears that quite likely, and in fact, the Pinkstons engineer, Bill Smith, also stated that it does appear that there's groundwater that is starting to flow. I was out there last week on the 13th, and in fact, it does appear there's groundwater flowing. And this would just be possibly due to the rain that it has been, whether it's the previous wet years. 2019, as we know, was a wet year. 2020 was a wet year, higher than average rainfall. This drainage ditch is significant. By the time you get, and you can see just the southern end of the road out front, it is a 6-foot deep ditch with 40 feet across. And so you can look at Google Earth and see the area before any development was in the area, not just Tory Lakes, but you can look back years, and there's nothing that is out there other than pasture land. And the ditch is there. So there's quite a bit of water that has come through here over the years, and it has created a substantial ditch that comes across here. Mr. Pinkston mentioned the developer. The developer previously, when he platted the property, did put a 30-foot overland drainage easement over that area. That's significant. That shows they recognize the ditch was there at that time. And one of the things that I think, when you're looking at city criteria and what is kind of unique with this situation, because overall, this is a very typical subdivision development. There's pasture, there's farmland, it converts to residential. This happens all over the metro, Jenks. Very typical things happen. But what is different in this one is that for some reason, and I don't know if it was because the plat was done in 1998, instead of having a reserve that you typically do with, you have plats now and you have drainage ways, those are a reserve. They're not someone's lot. And you do that for this very reason. So now you've got a change, and the Pinkstons don't like that there's some flow that's going there. Will this flow, if it's dry this summer, go away? Quite possibly. In the end, there is going to be some significant events that come through there. When we met out there on October 2nd, I told Councilman Murray, the Pinkstons, that our plans were in preliminary stage. We had gotten comments back, but we hadn't final. And we were standing there, and you could see there was going to be some impact. And you can hear that while we're the eastern part of the drainage basin, there's still development that's going to occur, and they've got bigger impacts coming their way because of discharges in a future detention pond that will be in that area. And so I had told them, we can look at things and see, can we mitigate some of the things? So I go back to our developer and I say, hey, we've got some extra space in our detention pond. I believe that we can over detain and hold back, not just what the city criteria is, that we can hold back a little bit more. And then we also looked at it, and our discharge point was in a standard location, but it was admittedly rather close to their property. And so I'd asked Mr. Kozort, could we see about acquiring more easement, and then we would move the discharge point further away from them and soften its impact, give us a little more room to nestle it in, add some riprap. And so all that did occur. And we went back and Mr. Kozort paid for us to redesign our work so that we did hold back an additional foot in the detention pond, which is significant. It knocked down the discharge from our pond approximately 12%. And so that also created some construction costs for him because the pond was fairly well along in its development. The contractor had already done some grading. So it was regraded. We were able to raise the berm, change some of the structures. And so, accommodations were made on that regard to help soften that impact. But in the end, we're still to the point that there's this small amount, I believe it's groundwater. Their engineer thought it was groundwater. That is just weeping out of the ground at that point. At this point, we've really not had any significant rain event. Particularly, all calculations are this pipe that you heard described is really just a pipe that was thrown in, and I think the affidavit from the developer alludes to it, that it was just put in to help close up the ditch, get a line fence in. There's really no calculation, determination into it. It probably was just a pipe they had, and they guessed the size, 24-inch. Our pipe that we discharge is a 30, so they weren't that far off, but it's nearly perfectly flat. And so it's not going to convey much water through it because there's no slope. It doesn't have the opportunity to build any head because there's hardly a berm there. So with heavier beds, this is going to overtop the slight berm that is at their property that this picture is taken close from, but you can't see it. But in the end, it's just going to come through. It should not be used, and the Pinkstons and their father-in-law, or Mrs. Pinkston's father, have alluded and put quite a bit of consideration into that pipe, as if it's a design. And it really is just a pipe that was put in so that it could drain out and get the water to move through from the little sump that is north of it. It is not calculated to be a 100-year event or convey a certain amount. And so it is just doing some drainage, but using it to determine that because you've lived there for 5 years and you haven't seen a 5-year event overtop it, the calculations are going to show that it will overtop when a 5-year storm event comes through. 5-year storm events have a 20% chance of happening. They have definition of the amount of water that falls out of the sky, the intensity, how long. And so we have storm events, and it is difficult to understand all that stuff. And while Mr. Riley is an engineer, he's not a civil engineer. He is a site civil engineer. He has worked in pipe mechanical. I believe he would be able to tell you tons about pipes and pressure flow, but to get up to speed and really understand hydrology and all the nuances that affect, you're trying to model a rain event. What happens? How quickly, how intense is a rain event? What is its runoff? What is the surface characteristics? How is this going to impact anyone along the flow? It is a bit much to pick up within a matter of months and really be able to cite a bunch of detail that would disprove what we have done. Our work was peer reviewed by Dr. Ellen Stevens. She is a engineer who specializes in hydrology, the same as what Bill Smith would do. He is a specialist in hydrology. They both are persons who are well known in the state. Ellen looked over our stuff, had some comments about orifice numbers, details. She thought certain things would reflect the site conditions. We integrated all that into our design. She never felt that we were erroneous in any of our calculations, any of our determinations, any of our existing flows. which are the key to this, because you look at existing, no adverse impact, we match what is the post-developed flow. In fact, when we met on April 30th and met with the Pinkston's engineer, he too has no comments about errors in our design. It was just differences in methodology. His design work is producing a lower number. He did it in a different manner. He did not say that we have errors in our system. We won't say that his method is an error either. He did it differently, and his number produced a lower number. But in the end, his comment is that he's talking about is with his design and methodology, he's working on lower numbers than ours. And so yes, ours, existing and developed, are going to be higher than what he has. But we are in compliance with the city's criteria. Our pre-development is, our post-development is lower than the pre-development. So there is no adverse impact. In fact, we've over-detained. Instead of just meeting the city criteria, we've exceeded it. So in all of that, I'm willing to answer any questions. There is a lot to deal with hydrology, but through our peer review, through discussions even with the Pinkston's engineer, we are confident in our design. We believe that it matches and meets the city's criteria, and that the final plat should be approved with those underpinnings of our engineering.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Any questions or comments from the right side of council?
I've got a couple of questions.
Councilor Isbell is recognized.
Can you give us a better definition of groundwater flowing? Would that be like a natural spring?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is. And in fact, when Bill Smith, the Pinkston's engineer, was out there, he saw that there was some groundwater there. You could see like a spring, but that day it wasn't it wasn't flowing very much. And in fact, he just talked about he had to put something in the water to see it move. And he suggested that you can put in piezometers, which are a device that allow you to see and measure and determine some groundwater flow. And he was suggesting that just to try and ascertain that that is in fact what is going on. But from what we've seen out there, and because there's really not a release coming from our pond yet at this time, it does appear to be groundwater. It looks like it's a higher water table.
Would it be a wet water spring or just a naturally occurring constant type spring?
I don't think it would be constant, because as we saw in October, it was not flowing. You could see in October, the pictures we have from that time, that there has been water in the ditch. There was no grass whatsoever, and you could tell that it was from some ponding. Whether that was from it flowed in the springtime, or whether it was just rain event and it didn't come out. But to say it was constant, no. And I would fully expect that if we go through a dry summer, it'll dry up.
Okay. My second question is, you stated earlier that you raised it a foot and a little bit more. What volume of water was the increase? Square footage or cubic feet?
I'm sorry, I don't have that memorized. I
No,
can
that's
get
fine.
that for you.
No,
But-
that's fine. I was just curious. You said you increased it by approximately 12%
We decreased our discharge by 12%. So,
by building it up higher.
right, so that we could detain more and hold more water back. So instead of matching the amount so that we have a certain size that will release, and then you calculate, and I'll make up a number for you, but it was like 3 feet we would hold, so that you've got that volume storage. Because we were able and had space, we were able to hold back even more and restrict our openings. So we modified our orifice to release at a slower rate, which means we're going to build up more. So we end up, instead of having like 3-4 feet.
So I guess my point is you were making an effort to compensate for the water flow.
Yes, and over detained. So since we had the space and you were able to do it, we could knock down and not just meet the city minimum criteria, we exceeded the criteria of holding back.
And my final question is, you personally, do you characterize these photographs as no adverse impact?
I have not seen anything. When I was out there on the 13th, I didn't see anything that looked particularly as this. I've walked this ditch line, and I don't know where these could be that there's this.
Okay.
Just looks out of character from everything I've seen out there. And depending on, What is there actually per FEMA? The answer would be yes.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. This is just for my own knowledge, but if you look at that top picture where the house is, where is the property line approximately with that easement?
So the easement, you can see the tree and where the tree swing is, and then you go to the right in the tree, and then there's the, you can just see a gray item there, and they've got a land bridge. And so just off this corner would be the north property line. And so you see their south property line past the tree swing, and that's where it goes under the road, and you've got the double 36-inch pipes that go underneath. So just right here to the right of where you see the slide, you'd be at the north property line, and that's where that 24-inch pipe is. And at that point, it's just a real minor soft swale at that time. And then the ditch progresses as it moves south.
Any questions from the left side of council? Councilor Murray, you're recognized.
Not so much a question, and I know Mr. Fisher, I was out there, and I appreciate, yes, coming out and spending the time, and I know the Pinksons did, and the suggestions that were made at that time about moving the drainage a little further north was listened to, and not being an engineer myself, I appreciate that, because I was just as a layman looking like, well, if it's not that close to their land, we move it, that obviously will help. And so I do appreciate them because they're at least doing that and listening to their request for that. So thank you for that.
Any other questions from the left side of council for Mr. Fisher? Mr. Fisher, what is your engineering discipline?
I'm a civil engineer.
Can you tell us in layman's terms, what is the definition of a drainage easement? And describe this particular easement and compare to ones you might typically see in a residential area, if you would.
So this one, well, we typically won't see an overland drainage easement in a residential anymore because it will be a reserve that'll be marked off. Older subdivisions, I live in one that was platted in 1967 in Bixby. We're like this. In fact, truly, we don't even have easements. The water courses just go across our yards. That was 1967. 1998, on this particular lot, and really the Snow Tree subdivision, the developer and his engineer, who I don't recall who it was, they didn't pipe anything across. This subdivision is very linear. It's basically a row of like 8 or 9 houses. And so there's easements for just overland drainage. Overland drainage is that you provide for water to flow overland. You're not supposed to put obstructions into it. So technically you're not supposed to put like a wood picket fence through it. If you have an easement like this, at the front, the Pinkstons have like a chain link with the split rail on it. That's the most you would want to put on something. Other folks will put the metal wrought iron looking so that the water flows on through it. You would want to make sure that you don't ever do anything to obstruct the flow. And in fact, when we were out there and we met in October and we had our survey crew go through and pick up some stuff, I did write to the Pinkstons and advise that with all the water they've got, because there's a 15-foot overland drainage easement that comes across their northern boundary from the northwest corner, and then it buries up with this one and then flows to the south. I was just advising, because there wasn't much of a swale, that if you ever have anyone out to do any work, you want to make sure and point these out, because in the past, we've done projects where folks don't pay attention. There may not be a dedicated easement, and they'll accidentally block their flow, and then they have issues of water coming into their house. And so I think I mentioned in the letter to them that I wrote, just always be aware that you've got quite a bit of water coming through and you'll want to maintain those overland drainage easements. They differ from a utility easement in that utility easements may be written that you could restrict it to water, or you just have it open to whomever. Maybe franchise people could go through them, or it could be other public utilities. But this one is dedicated to be overland drainage. So you're really looking at overland flow.
And Mr. Pinkston had mentioned, I believe I heard him correctly, that they at some point in the past they graded this easement. Is, in your professional opinion, should a drainage easement ever be graded by a homeowner? Did that potentially have any adverse effect on this easement doing what it's supposed to do?
Right, and you would want to be careful with that. You'd be looking at the cross-sectional area to make sure that you've got the volume still to come down through there. So while one may want to, you could, and what a number of folks would do is possibly hardscape it, put some stones in there to make it so that it is settled in. You would want to be careful that you don't restrict the flow, limit the ability to the conveyance of the stormwater. You would be careful of that.
You've also mentioned repeatedly that the applicant or the developer has more than met the city's requirements for water runoff and water detention. But in your professional opinion, are the city's requirements reasonable enough? How do we fare compared to anyone else in Tulsa County, if you can share that experience with us?
We do development work all across Tulsa metro area, and Jenks criteria is quite standard, and it does match up fairly well. I say fairly only because it's a tad dated. And so there's some elements in it that would be freshened up. And one of the things that is in it is that the criteria states specifically what some of the, what the 100-year intensity should be. And I think it's like 8.75 inches.
Have you had that discussion with our city engineers as to the potential updates that we could look at?
Yeah, I have. And I did a study real quickly because what one would do and what the current thing is that you detach from a current number. And as the science develops, and we've all heard about the climate change and weather whiplash on things. And so when we go to seminars and floodplain managers seminars, it is real current status that everyone in municipalities are kind of changing their 100-year to up them a little bit more. And so I did a real quick study of what the current 100-year would be if you just went to the nearest NOAA Mesonet weather station, which is at 121st Memorial. I was shocked there wasn't one at the airport, but 121st Memorial was the closest one. And it was just a little over 9 inches versus the 8.75. And so we did the numbers, and it isn't significantly off, but in the future, and what most are going to, is that it'll tie in. And so as NOAA or Mesonet update their numbers, we would just follow in line with that. So while it's a little dated, it's not far off, and it really didn't produce much of a different number. And it was well within what we had designed already. And then there's some other element, I don't remember what it was particularly, but I did comment when Christopher was here, so before Chris Floyd, just a comment of something. And I believe the city, they mentioned you all are getting ready to do an update.
Okay. Any other questions from or comments for Mr. Fisher from the council? Would anybody from city staff like to comment?
Say just a few words.
This is Mr. Chris Floyd. He's the city engineer for the city of Jenks. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Mayor, council members, all along the city has abided by the guidelines and the requirements. We have reviewed every subdivision. We've treated Tory Lake subdivision no differently, and they have abided by our requirements. I would like to make one comment just as a defense that because I made the comment that said we are still working with Kingston's, just because I didn't accept their solution to the problem doesn't mean that I was continuing to offer my assistance and help in any way possible. So I apologize if they misunderstood my comments when I said what I said. So I just want to make sure that was part of the record. Are there any questions of me?
Well, yeah, two now that you're here.
Okay.
You should have stayed seated.
I'm opening myself up there.
In your opinion, and this is from conversations, I've had multiple conversations with a variety of people. As a professional engineer, I've heard it said, these aren't my words, that the experience that Pinkston's have had, the top picture versus the bottom pictures, is not necessarily they had it good, but this potentially might be more true to what a water drainage easement look like and how it should perform? In your opinion only, do you think they've had it good these number of years and that's why they see pictures like we do on top with an oasis and now we have water running through and turning into mud? Is it potentially, it's just potential that they've had it good for a number of years?
Essentially.
Okay.
It's hard to know, and it's hard to know when they were observing their site, what actual storm events hit their site. You can look at what the recorded weather information is over time, but it's not at their property at when those storm events hit. So you don't have exact data from their site over that period of time. And again, there is a misunderstanding when we say 5-year storm. That doesn't mean this is the worst storm you're going to get every 5 years. Every year, you have a 20% chance of having that level of storm. That's what a 5-year refers to. And EPA, FEMA, they're working on changing that wording because when we say the 100-year storm, that means you have a 1% chance of having that storm in a given year. Not that this storm will only happen once every 100 years. And that has really confused a lot of people. So we're trying to, hopefully, that world is trying to change their terminology.
Is it also your opinion, sir, that the engineers representing the Pinkstons versus the developers do not actually disagree, but have agreed that they simply are measuring from the beginning and end standpoint, beginning and end from a different perspective? Is that, I'm trying to summarize that in my own head. I've heard it twice. They're not disagreeing. They're just measuring from a different starting point. Can you share with us that sentiment?
A different methodology.
Okay.
From a different standpoint.
Not wrong or right, but just, okay.
And neither one, during the meeting that we all had together, neither one said the other one's numbers is wrong. They were just using a different approach. I think if we've got another hydrologist in here, they might do it. You look at the same thing, it might come away with slightly different numbers. It's not an exact science. It's art and science, but it's not a thing where 2 + 2 always equals 4. There's so many different variables involved.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the council for Mr. Cloyd?
If I may, Mr.
Councilor
Mayor, I'd
Murray.
like to, in defense of Mr. Floyd, ever since my meeting with Pinkstons, Mr. Fisher, since October, every issue that has come in front of me on this issue, I've come to Mr. Floyd, Mr. Carr, Mr. Shroud, Ms. Hilton, and the city council to try to do something that we can for our citizens. And every time, somebody's come up, I've asked him, I said, could you take a look at something? And he's been very willing to do so. And I very much appreciate it. And your defense that you've done from what you've told me, everything the city has required. And I'm very pleased with that. And I can only hope that we can do what we can for not only the Pinkstons, but for Mr. Cozart and his development too. So thank you, Mr. Thank you.
And Mr. Murray, how many times has this vote been tabled?
This was the third time I believe.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Cloyd? Thank you, sir. We would extend an invitation to, sure, come on up, sir.
Mr. Riley.
Mr. Riley, name and address for the record, please.
Several times. My name is Dale Riley.
Bill Riley?
Dale.
Dale, thank you, Dale.
My address is 416-189 East 1201 Road before home. And I appreciate the opportunity to address the council. You've already heard my disqualifications. So I want to tell you a little about who I am. I'm a registered engineer in Oklahoma for the last 34 years, over 40 years of engineering experience. And yes, they're right. I haven't had a formal hydrology course. I've had a really crash course instead of last year. But I've had an extensive exposure on Lake Eufaula to helping developments with their engineering needs, their distribution needs as far as water and source is concerned. So I can speak to this with a little bit of expertise without backing up and saying I don't understand hydrology. One thing I would like to get clear relative to your question. Mr. Smith, in his correspondence with Mr. Macy, said that the pre-development flow is going to be exceeded by the post-development flow. There's no ambiguity in that. That's it. So to say that these are consistent simply because of maybe a difference in flow rate that was utilized is not an accurate statement. Mr. Smith reached a different conclusion with his analysis than TEP did. Now, I happen to have brought a copy of this report that I do not understand. Is that accurate or not? You don't know, do you? It's a bunch of words, and it is more art than it is science. Now, one of the things when a landowner is presented with this, they have no real reference point to decide whether this is accurate or it isn't accurate. All they have is the production engineering firm that put it together. And I'm not casting disparity against TEP, but I'm smart enough, and I'm just an old country boy, and I understand pipe flow. Now, if the Peakston didn't have this unique feature in their property, or on their property at the back fence, this seemingly unimportant 24-inch diameter, 30-foot long pipe, we wouldn't be having this discussion because we wouldn't have any opportunity to refute whether this is right or wrong. Now, what we find, as Mr. Fisher mentioned, that this 24-inch pipe is laying just as flat as this floor. It has no dynamic head to it, or no differential head to it. And you can Google 24-inch pipe, how much flow goes through it. And I'll tell you what it'll tell you 18,000 gallons. And you can push the design beyond that by changing the element as far as the elevations from end to end and get more flow through. This pipe on the Peakston property has 1 foot of soil on top of it. That 1 foot has been there since 1988 or 1998. We have an affidavit from the original developer. He and Mr. Rowe put that pipe in. And they put it in for the purpose, I think, that Mr. Fisher alluded to, and that is that they could put a fence through there and they would have passage across the ditch. When we look at what it takes for this pipe to be overflowed, anytime the flow gets above 25,000 gallons coming off of that drainage basin, it's going to overflow that pipe. Now, one of two things: either you don't believe the Pinkstons and the original developer are telling you the truth when they say that this has never overflown the pipe, or this hydrology report prepared by TEP is not accurate. TEP's pre-developed flow for a 5-year rain event is 76.7 cubic feet per second. That equates to 34,000 gallons a minute. Anything over 25,000 gallons a minute is going to overflow this burn. The Pinkstons have alluded to and attested to that they've never seen this come over the burn. They've owned it for 13 years. Even when we go to the post-developed calculations in TEP's report, we find that that's 68.6 or 68.2 cubic feet per second. In order for that to happen, that means that pipe is going to pass 30,600 gallons. So even by using their own report on a 5-year event, we find that the post-developed flow in their report is going to overflow this pipe. Now, you can ignore them, but I'm telling you that it's basic mechanics, and it's really a whole lot less assumptions go into calculating the flow through this pipe. Now, the Pinkston has offered a solution. And the last correspondence we got from Mr. Floyd was that the meeting that we actually weren't invited to, we asked if we needed to be a part of that, and we were told, no, leave it to the professionals. But the last correspondence we got from him essentially said that both the hydrologist and TEP, Mr. Smith and TEP, agreed that there could be a stormwater pipe system put across the Pinkston property, but it cost too much. I don't know Again, I don't know much about math, but I looked at the sign over on Tory Lake's development. It's $350,000 starting point. You guys have allowed him to build 140 homes. Where if you looked at your comprehensive plan, you'd find he should have been building about 80 homes. That's past. We're not going to stop Tory Lakes from being an event. That's going to happen. What's going to matter is whether or not Tory Lakes will be responsible for now and in the future for creating a situation where the Pinkstons are going to see a significant increase in this post-developed flow. And this is not rocket science. This is not about art and applied science. This is a really simple calculation. I challenged Mr. Clover, your city engineer, to make this same simple calculation. He told me that wasn't his job. And I guess it isn't. But the problem that I have with this is that I see what's coming down the road. This is going to be a continual maintenance. And it just ought not be. I feel like that Pinkston would have been better served if they had 10 neighbors downstream. They're the only ones that's impacted by this. 40% of this development drains across their property. And yes, they put in a retention pond. And they talk about the groundwater you were mentioning. This retention pond is just up the hill, and it's maybe wrong, 65 feet deep. Guess where that water's coming from, I think. So it's not a simple yes or no answer. And there is a reason why it's been taken for 2 times. And I feel like I'm preaching, I apologize for that, but I am passionate about this. And I don't appreciate people attacking my credentials when they don't really know. I will be glad to answer any questions if you have some for me.
Any questions for Mr. Riley on the right side of the council? Questions on the left? And just for the record, Mr. Riley, what's your engineering discipline?
Minor engineering discipline is mechanical engineering.
And what is your current relationship with the Pinkston family? Are you?
Andrew is my dog.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I think Greg mentioned that earlier. And I think Mr. Fisher mentioned that earlier.
Okay. Yeah, unless there's anyone else on city staff that care to, I think at this point, out of respect for Mr. Pinkston, where did you go, sir? You've been, by the way, thank you, Mr. Riley. I don't guess there's no more questions. Yes, sir, you may. Yes, sir, you may.
This is a statement. I've been watching you guys on TV years. Also been watching the planning commission TV. And I was impressed by Commissioner Brandt on April 6th, when they were also considering whether they wanted to approve another one of these high density subdivisions over off about 131st in Parkland. He made this statement. When I started, going back to my duties and responsibility, because our responsibility is to prevent overcrowding of land and undue encroachment, to provide development of the community according to the comprehensive plan. There is nothing in duties and responsibilities of the Planning Commission that are designed to ensure the greatest economic return for development. Where we are supposed to be encouraging development, removing all standards to maximize what the developer can pull out of a development project is not within our purview or within our scope. We are supposed to ensure that the developments are done to the best interest of the community. Thank you for your time.
One last question for you, Mr. Riley. Speaking of the Planning Commission, do you remember what their vote was on this particular issue? Okay.
I know that we had some circumstances that we're not able to make.
Mrs. Hilton, what was the vote from the Planning Commission?
I think it was.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Out of respect for Mr. Pinkston, for all the time that you put into this, and you've been down the river, so to speak, on this deal. I don't have a problem. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to make addressing to this council? We can keep this going all night, but we've been working on this for a long time. So we'll give you last opportunity if you would, Pastor.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that our main complaint isn't against TEP. Honestly, it's the city that is not city's standards, but they're allowing this to happen.
Yeah.
And we're not asking TEP to be held responsible. We're asking the city to be held responsible because it's the city that has approved a plan that's allowing this to happen. So I just want to make sure that's clear. So,
I made that clear earlier. Thank you. Appreciate you. We'll close the floor to the citizens and our experts. Anybody on council care to comment? Okay. Yes, Councilor Murray, you're recognized.
This has been a very touchy subject, and I appreciate everybody coming and speaking on it because I know there's been a lot of input into it, a lot of studies, a lot of expense. And I don't take it lightly by any means of voting yea or nay on going on with this, but I feel like we've got to do something with it tonight based on the fact that we have full settle times. Our city engineer has said that they've done what they can for the city. And I know that the Kingston's have done a lot, Mr. Cosart has done a lot, but it's a case of, I just feel like I don't know what the city would do further than this. Mr. Peterson said that we're going to be not necessarily held accountable, but it's kind of incumbent on the city to do something. I just feel like from what I have been told personally in the meetings and from our experts that I have to rely on, that we have done all we can do, but I think I would maybe put it back on the developer that they're going with the pretense that our studies show that we're not adding anything to this. And I think I would like to, at least on record, say that if that's the case, if this is approved tonight, and a week from now, a year from now, or 10 years from now, barring anything changing on the Kingston land, that based on the development there, if this causes more of an issue, that then there can be recourse back on the developer. I don't know, I'm throwing that out for discussion.
You guys are really letting me down. I would agree. I think there's, I'm just trying to, first of all, I'll say this, and to Mr. Riley, I don't believe for a second there's a case here or there's anybody here that has studied that this is not a case of who we believe. We believe everyone. We have no reason to think that our staff would mislead us in any case. This is not the first time. Well, actually, there's two of us on this council that have been in two different situations. One was related to butane gas tanks blowing up. The other was related to whether or not we should tell you to wear a mask. And in both scenarios, we had engineers bouncing us around like ping pong balls. And I can tell you that this is very hard stuff. I heard it's not rocket science, but I think it is rocket science to me. This is very difficult to read. It takes a lot of time and energy to read through all these things. I think at the end of the day, in many cases, the city council, our approval or non-approval, we look at these things in a strategic level. Is anybody an engineer, moonlights as an engineer or has an undergrad or anything? No, we don't. We have a former planning commissioner here, and notice he's the one who asked the majority of the questions, and he's very technical and usually digs pretty deep, but we are not the experts. So we're stuck sometimes in these tough decisions back when ConocoPhillips was here and back when COVID was rearing its ugly head. We have four doctors screaming at four doctors, and we're sitting in the middle going, are you a doctor? I'm not a doctor. And all we have is the current rules on the book, the current US Constitution. We have the current city guidelines, and if they need to be amended or adopted, then we have work to do. And I think our current city engineer and our past city engineer hopefully acknowledge that if our city guidelines are out of date, I think we have some work to do. And I think the engineer that spoke earlier, Mr. Fisher, probably pointed that out. So we're in a tough position of not being the least technically savvy people to make these decisions. And I want you to know that. And I want you to understand when you walk away from here, it has nothing to do with whether or not we believe. Are you a pastor? We believe you, sir. We do. And we believe his opinion. and everybody's got an opinion, and we're in the middle trying to balance what really the backstop for us legally is the United States Constitution, our city ordinances, our city guidelines. I personally I stay in my lane. I don't veer too far from making a personal rendered decision that strays too far from what I can be held accountable for. So I just want to let you know, as the leader of this council, I do not speak necessarily for all of them because I haven't had one-on-one discussions with anyone other than Councilor Murray. So but I want to give you the idea that this is kind of where we're coming from. I don't know if you got that same impression from the Planning Commission, but I think for the most part, I know these people. We strive to do the very best we can with the information we have. So with that being said, if there's no other comments from professionals, or would anybody, are you going to make a motion, or would you like to make the last comment?
I would, if you would indulge me, I would like to ask one question.
You are
Mr. Fisher.
indulged.
Mr. Fisher,
You want me to come up?
please come up. Let's take a look at the end game. If the development goes in, once it's completed, we have streets, we have yards, we have sidewalks, we have driveways, we have plumbing, everything's in place. The flow today versus the flow at that date should be diminished significantly, correct?
I'm not sure I'm following your question.
Evaporation, saturation in the yards, things like that. The water will not flow the same as it would today where the land is clear.
That is true. So right now, there's a lot of bare ground out there. The soil is a good mix, actually, of sand and clay. It's not high clay where it's going to run off quite a bit. It has a good mix. I fully expect that, the pond will seal up and has an amount of clay into it, but you are correct. Without the grass cover that has been there, it's been quite lush because the cattle have been off of it for quite a while. And so when that was removed, it did change the characteristics of things for a while. And at its current level, we don't have the stormwater collection system complete so that it'll gather all that and everything will run through the detention pond. So right now, there is a bit of runoff that is going away and not funneling through per design, but it will get there. You're correct.
The professional opinion is that the amount of water today will be different than the completed development water.
Right.
Thank you.
And it will be a different characteristic, which is a big part.
Sure. And flowing at a slower rate because of the concrete, the curves, everything that's slowing.
Now we'll be able to detain it. Right now, it is doing just direct runoff. All that you're going to get is, depending on what the soil is, since it's wet right now, if it rains hard, it's going to run off rather quickly. If it has a chance to dry out, you have like percolation, infiltration, and it will soak up some of it. But without the grass cover to really slow things down, it'll fairly quickly run off right now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Any other comments or questions from the city council? Okay. Councilor Murray, thank you for all your hard work. At this time, would you like to entertain a motion for item D?
Well, after all the discussion and knowing what all has been taking place in this, I'm going to make the recommendation to approve it, but based still back on what I said. I just feel like that if something a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, and unbarring, unforeseen godly nature, that because of this development, that it does cause a lot more undue, that I want to go at least on record that I feel like then that if the city has done what they can, then the developer will need to step up and do something drastic.
Are you stating in you're asking the developer in your motion to make whole, because that's a different motion completely.
And I don't know, Ms. Allen, if I can do that, put that bar on the developer. I at least want it on record stating that I feel like if we do approve this and we're going with both sides and listening to both sides, that they're saying it shouldn't cause a problem any more than it has, but if we find that it does, that at least there's some recourse.
I think it's a valid comment, but not a motion that we could entertain.
I think I'll just say this, and this is not the city council asking you, Mr. Kozor, as a good neighbor, for a good neighbor policy that doesn't even exist. If it,
Cause a problem, it's obvious, yes.
that's more than I think we hope for. Right?
Those pictures up there are not.
Thank you, Mr. Kozor. Appreciate you, sir. Let's make the motion again without any potential
Without the
legal
potential.
obligations or future enforcement for either party.
Before, again, thank you all for coming in and speaking on this, and we're just been trying to do what we can for them. I'll make the motion that we approve the plat.
Second.
We have a proper motion and a proper second for item D on the consent agenda. Can we vote, please?
Murray,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Short,
Yes.
OJ,
Yes.
Kaylin,
Yes.
Isabel. Yes. Mayor Box.
Yes. Thank you all very much for your participation. We have something to discuss that's not on the agenda, so out of respect for everyone's time, we won't deviate too far from this, but is Mr. McFarland still with us? Mr. Josh McFarland? Council would like to address you if you could for a moment, sir. And if you could officially state your name and address for the record, please, and your business entity as well.
I realize that they set up now. Josh McFarland, Red Dog Construction. What else?
Your address for the record?
5208 East 108th Street.
Wait a minute. You live in Tulsa? Change it.
But we office in.
Okay. Quick bottom line is we have received some communication from some of your tenants and professional colleagues as it relates to Melody Lane. And we are not a court of law, but bottom line is I think you're absolutely guilty of doing way too damn much to make the city of Jenks a better place. And as a result, Councilor Kaylin would like to take a moment to acknowledge some of the things that you've been doing for us lately. So you stand guilty and accused, my friend. Councilor Lynn.
To all that know or don't know, Josh McFarland and Red Dog Construction has created Melody Lane without asking the city for one penny. They came in and they brought something that was dust and they brought it back to life. So Josh, I'm going to read this to you. It is with appreciation to present this key to the city of Jenks to Josh McFarland and Red Dog Construction. With no financial incentive to do so, their contribution to the tremendous growth of economic development in Jenks has been a true gift to the citizens. The creation of Melody Lane District will spark growth and highlight incentives for future economic development. Thank you.
Thank you to Mr. Tedford for getting him here, and Coach Pace. Coach Pace, would you give him a big bear hug on his way out? Hard one.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you, and obviously it's a team thing to get that development going and everything, and a bunch of other people should be here to support. So thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you guys.
Thank you. And for everybody, small, quick opportunity to thank you to Councilor Lynn. This is her idea. This is her vision. And we had an opportunity last month to recognize another one of our citizens who was here earlier, and she has left. But these are the good things that we get to do. It's not always fun, but this is the good stuff. And Councilor Lynn has done a fantastic job in recognizing some of these guys, and especially Red Dog Construction. We're happy that they're such a good neighbor for us, and they're putting a lot of time and effort into making Jenks a better place. Thank you, Mr. McFarland. Good night, sir. Let the record reflect that Councilor Kaylin is dismissed at 7:15 p.m. She will not be returning. Where the heck are we?
Item
Great. Okay. Looks like we've been here a long time. Okay, moving on. Item number 3, consideration and possible approval, denial, amendment, and/or revision of recommendation of Jenks zoning 21, planned unit development 127, a request by Robert Bell for approval of a planned unit development and a zone change from agriculture to RS2 residential single family medium density. The general location is the south corner of East 126th Street, South and South Harvard Avenue. We're on page 71 in your packet if you'd like to follow along, and Mrs. Marcia Hilton will be joining us. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Council, and staff, this item is a request for a rezoning with a PUD overlay. So as you know, and I have been going through a little more discussion for our new councilors because I don't know yet how much when I'm talking. So the underlying zoning they're requesting is RS2. At the end of the day, I'm asking you to request the RS2 zoning plus the PUD. And once a PUD is approved, it stays with the land. That is the rules and the law for that land. It says that you can do houses. They have these requirements within those houses. In this case, they have a minimum square footage, all brick, etc. So that stays with the land until until it's built out in a residential subdivision, or in some cases, especially on commercial properties, which you'll see often, they come back and ask to amend a PUD. And it happens sometimes in residential areas as well, but that's kind of what we're talking about tonight. So Planning Commission did hear this originally on April the 8th, 2021, and there was a lot of discussion. Commissioner Minden lives in that area, and she was very vocal about her concerns, primarily concerning traffic and density. Commissioner Brown was very concerned. He has a personal preference, which he is not comfortable with homes being 5 feet from the property line. That's his personal conviction. It's a very common conviction, but it's also a very common practice around the country. And if you go to Europe, they literally build them wall to wall. And in New York. So it's common, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be one way or the other. You can choose. So on May the 6th, the item was heard a second time. So basically in April, there was a motion to table until the developer brought it back with larger side yard setbacks. And that motion failed. There was a second motion to approve it as presented. That motion failed. And the third motion was, let's continue this until we get more information or another planning commissioner to break the tie. Because we had one commissioner absent. So they came back May 6th. In the meantime, Mr. Brown did some research on his own. That particular evening, they did approve the estates at Ritz Hollow, which you have also approved the estates at Ritz Hollow. And it did have 5 and 5 side yards. And then I also presented to the City Council and to the Planning Commission the summary from House of Levine, which explains what our development looks like on the ground, which is nothing like our code book. So we have a book that has a lot of rules and regulations, and then most of our subdivisions are regulated by these private ordinances, these private laws, I'll call them in this case. So when Mr. Brown realized that Estates at Ritz Hollow was approved just before this one came before the Planning Commission, and that, well, I don't know the percentage, but many of the subdivisions in the city of Jenks have been approved over the years with 5-foot setbacks on each side. So he said, you're right, I see it, I don't like it, but I will vote for it. So the vote did change. That being said, that's kind of how we got here tonight. I'm going to talk about traffic first. There was a big traffic conversation. Our chair for the Planning Commission lives in that area, and I've heard from a couple of residents, not in opposition to the project, but it's just actually expressing, yeah, I have seen some accidents over the years or had families and accidents there. The city of Jenks started a conversation, so I've been here a little over a year, and right after I came, we had a gentleman who would be diagonally across. So this is, if there was a real corner, and there's not, but if you were at 126 and Harvard, we're talking about the southwest northwest corner, and this gentleman lives in the northeast corner, so diagonally across. He bought the property and developed it as a single family residence, and started bringing up the traffic concerns because I think he has young drivers and was worried that as they were coming and going, they might be in trouble with the traffic. So we talked about, could there be stop signs? It's not really an intersection, it's a curb. We talked about a lot of options. I believe signs were added after that conversation. That was correct. Last year sometime, they put up some more, just a couple of signs saying this is a curb, slow down, kind of warning issues. Is that correct?
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, we did talk about it. So to date, I thought we'd already made some of those changes, but I think one or two signs somewhere. Anyway, staff will consider Commissioner Mendez's comments as we move forward, but we have agreed from the staff perspective that stop signs will be installed, and that will be the first step. And I believe that would be whether this is approved or not. And it's not ideal. Like I said, it's not an actual intersection. It is a curb, but the thought process behind it is getting people to slow down and consciously make an effort to stop and consider what's coming around the curb. If this is a private gated neighborhood, I call it part of the Fraser Legacy, one of the Fraser Legacy projects. We have Fraser Lakes, which I think I call all of them Fraser Lakes most of the time. We have Fraser Meadows, and this is Fraser Falls. So this one's directly north of the Fraser Meadows development, and it is a private gated community. If you look on page 73 of your packet, or page 3 of 8 of the staff report, it talks about our TAC comments, and TAC is our Technical Advisory Committee. In this particular case, we did have a virtual meeting, and I did hear from quite a few of my members. So there are some comments there. I had a couple of comments, nothing major. This is in Ward 3. The current zoning on this is agriculture, and we talked about that in our last discussion. Very common, you have these large parcels. Jenks is about 75% built out, and that's going very quickly. It's still a very, it's a great place to live. It's a great place to raise your families. The school systems are outstanding, and that's why these large ag parcels keep getting gobbled up, because people want to live here. We always invite the school system when we have our meetings, so they know when subdivisions are coming in, and they consider that in their calculations for classes, etc. Okay. It is medium intensity on the comprehensive plan, and the comprehensive plan is the land use guide. A couple of years ago, the city of Jenks hired House of Levine to do a new comprehensive plan and to give us a new unified development ordinance, which will replace our ordinances now. And the comprehensive plan is a guide. It doesn't have any teeth. It says we think that it would be best if we suggested this use here. It helps protect the city when we move forward, so that we don't go and randomly approve things that aren't in alignment with our vision and goals. They did an enormous amount of public outreach and talked to citizens and got their opinions. In this particular case, it is medium intensity, and that area is medium intensity. The PUD is called Fraser Falls, and they do intend to keep 3 wet ponds with some water features. They intend to have a vehicular bridge. We've run this through public safety. The fire chief is aware that this is something they're requesting, and that's a question that gets asked often. They intend to include walking trails, have waterfalls, pickleball. We need to laugh, don't we? There's also a high pressure gas line that has to be taken into consideration. They will have sidewalks and trails. The maximum number of homes that could be built with the density would be 130. They are proposing 109. The average lot is about 60 by 120, and the starting price is about $350,000. There are 3 areas of infrastructure improvement. So number 1, with the approval of this plat and rezoning, with the approval of the rezoning and the PUD, The next step would be plating, as you know, and they would dedicate right of way on that hard corner. So where 126th and Harvard intersects, where we now have that curve, they would dedicate additional right of way more than normal so that we can get that curve straightened out and get that line of sight cleaned up. They would also, upon ownership, they'll begin to clear that area. So number 2 would be to revise the sewer plan. And number 3, extend a 12-inch water line along Harvard. If you look on page 75 of 124, this is the standard form that's in, or chart that's in the zoning code. And I'd just like to help you understand where you're at. So if they were doing RS1, these are the Vulcan area standards. You did RS2, this is what it looks like, RS3. So the PUD is somewhere between RS2 and RS3, and they are asking for RS2. All right, we'll just keep going. Page 76, this is an exhibit taken from the PUD. You can see the 3 ponds here, you can see the streets. Fraser Meadows will not be able to go north on the street. I don't know if I can see my finger. Fraser Meadows would not, the citizens there would not be able to go north, but Fraser Falls would be able to go south, and that would be a safe fire safety requirement so that they have access, second access. There will be a little bit of change to the Fraser Meadows plat if this item is approved, because they're going to take one of those lots and they would end this access. So currently, I drew a little blue line. Currently, this street goes all the way through to Harvard, and if this project is approved, that access will go away. Then it will become a lot in Fraser Meadows, or Fraser Falls, actually, sorry.
I'm
No.
sorry,
Yes, ma'am.
Marseille.
Yes.
Can you take the mouse and show us what you're talking about? Because I don't understand what you just said.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, you can use that one if you want, if it's
Okay.
easier.
Yeah, okay. Let's see.
Just close your eyes. Can you blow that up, Brandon?
Oh, wait.
Well, I'm just having to blow it up. Okay, so where were you talking about?
Bring the green diagram. How about I just walk over here?
Okay, that's fine.
Thanks. Next time I'll practice. So this is the access to Harvard right now from Fraser Meadows. If this is approved, this access goes away and it becomes part of a platted lot. You can see this little pie shape here, and it will be platted with Fraser Falls. They would not, this development would not have that access, and it is not required by city staff or public safety. So that's what I'm saying. So Fraser Meadows will not be able to go north, but Fraser Falls will have access off of Harvard, and they'll be able to go south through here.
Okay, so we will have 2 accesses from this diagram. They're just cutting off the one they would have had originally if it not have been for this.
This one would only have been for Fraser Meadows.
Okay.
So that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
So what, can I ask a question at this point?
Yes. Oh, I don't know.
Yes.
With respect to this being a gated community, how do they access the homes on the southern edge there?
From, I believe it's 128th Street.
Right there, those
This
houses.
one will be Meadows.
Okay,
Or-
that is the other development.
Yes.
That's
This one,
the answer I
These
thought.
lots are platted with Fraser Meadows.
Thank you. So they're not considered in the total count.
Correct.
That's
You didn't
wrong,
consider
they're
that?
part of the total count. But
Of the 109
of
homes.
the 109 homes,
Mhm.
the bill, it will be the third phase Meadows.
That's,
Gotcha. Sorry if I jumped out.
no, that's okay.
Thank
That's a
you.
good question. Mhm. Okay. So the code has 4 conditions for council to consider and for planning commission. They're the same, basically. Whether the PUD is consistent with the comprehensive plan, whether the PUD harmonizes with the existing and expected development of surrounding areas, whether the PUD is a unified treatment of development possibilities of the site, the project site, and whether the PUD is consistent with the stated purposes and standards of this chapter. And in this case, I think that the developer did a really good job. There's a blue line stream that runs, and that's why, one of the reasons I believe why they're keeping the lakes, and they're trying not to touch that area, and they're protecting the vegetation there as best they can. At this time, staff, planning commission, and TAC do recommend approval of the Fraser Falls request to rezone from Ag to RS2 with the added planned unit development overlay known as PUD 127. Starting on page 79, you're going to see the actual PUD. There's just a couple of minor comments. And that continues to page 85. There's some larger exhibits, I think on 87, you can see that a lot better. And you can see the natural vegetation in your exhibit, I think, on page 86. You can see how there's a lot of vegetation. And I do not have anything else.
Any questions for Mrs. Hilton on the right side of council? Any questions for Mrs. Hilton on the left side? Councilor Short.
On page 89, if you guys good aerial of 126.
Yes.
The vegetation, not the trees, bushes, all of that to be eliminated in this as a way to visually help traffic.
Yes, and you can see, I'm going to hold up the green diagram. So it would be right here. This is the curve there.
Yes, correct.
So cutting that out and dedicating that as right of way, and you'll see this whole corner missing on the other diagram where they will dedicate the right of way. But immediately taking care of any brush that's causing the drivers to not be able to see down the corner.
I've driven that 100 times. I think if we clear the vegetation out, that would make enormous difference. It necessarily creates the homeowners' concern about oncoming traffic, but it stops.
Yeah, right now that's really not a curve, it's a turn. So it would, yeah, it'd be helpful to have that a little softer.
Any further questions for Mrs. Hilton? Would the applicant like to speak?
My name is Robert Bell, 1011 West G Street, and the most exciting thing we heard tonight was the engineers agreed that 2 + 2 was not 4.
Mm-hmm.
That's for, I enjoyed that. So, this development, and Carrie, can we go back to the air photo that's the page before this? There we go.
Robert, this is Mr. Macy.
Yeah, I got it. Oh, you're doing it now. Okay, so planning commission, Carrie does it on. No, I do too. Okay. So,
Carrie is currently not with us.
Okay, well,
In the
that's
building.
good. That's good to know. Thank you. This development is exciting, and what the applicant has done is that area through that development in the middle is dry, it's lower than the rest of that property. There's a large amount of large trees through there. And instead of a developer going in and taking those trees out and clearing the land and making it developable, he's taken whatever is necessary, the steps to save those trees, to raise them up, create a park-like setting. And doing that, he is planning to create 3 wet ponds on there that will have no water. So we're going to create water. We're going to have a research system so it becomes an amenity for that subdivision. Now, there's a detention facility that will be located on the the west end of that will have to handle all the water and that goes through this system, and that's where Marseille was talking about the pickleball court. This is because of the extent of all that, this is a true cluster development. It's still compatible, it still meets with our the city of Jenks criteria as far as yield goes at that point. The developer offered the right of way. We recognized it from the get-go, and it's a part of our application that we're not waiting for that dedication in the plat. What we're going to do is we're going to clear those trees out so they're not a problem for the right of way, and then we're going to give that area to the city, and you can see that area on the drawing of the subdivision, which is the next page at that point. Also, because this property was not under contract when Meadows went through, there's a lift station on Meadows development. Because of that, in the next phase, I have to put a lift station on the fall development. That's ridiculous to have 2 lift stations in that area. So we're not going to start the homes on Meadows until we can get through to move the lift station forward. That helps the city, that helps the area. And so that's a benefit. Also, we talked about, I heard Marseille talk about the 12-inch water line, and that's significant because the 12-inch coming from 131st Street is on the vault that goes on 131st Street off of the Tulsa water line. And the other water line that comes up to the 126th in Delaware is from 121st. So we're connecting 2 systems in that area that doesn't exist right now. So that should be helpful to the water system. As Marseille said, this is a gated community. The houses are at a minimum 2,200 square feet in size. That's a good size home, larger than most of the gated ones that as a starting point, and 100% brick. So, and I don't want to labor on too long. If you guys have any questions, then happy to answer.
Any questions for Mr. Bell on the right side? Questions for Mr. Bell on my left?
Did you say, sorry, Mr. Bell, did you say that the calls will not, they'll start before the Meadows because of the lift station, or vice versa?
Vice versa. We just can't, the timing of that lift station, we can't submit those plans and have anything done with that lift station until we own the property. And that's supposed to be June 15th. And in fact, one of the things that that Marseille may bring up is our application was set the approval of the ordinance for the PUD to be set for June 16th. So we can approve it tonight, but we can't act on it till June 16th at that point. So it's a banking and a ownership issue. I've got to have one, and I can't do the other one yet. So
yeah, thank you.
Any more questions for Mr. Bell? Wait for him to sit down, then I'll tell him I have one. Okay, thank you, Mr. Bell. Any more questions from council before we consider item number 3? If there's no questions from council, we'll entertain a motion for item number 3.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a proper motion and a proper second on item number 3. Let's vote, please.
Murray?
Yes.
Klein?
Yes.
Short?
Yes.
OJ?
Yes.
Isabel?
Yes.
Mayor Buckles?
Yes. Item number 4, request to approve ordinance number 1553 relating to JZ 21 PUD 127.
So moved. Second.
We have a proper motion and a second. Let's vote, please. Are we pulling the emergency clause, or are we pulling?
Item 5.
We're pulling 5. Okay. Do you need to speak on before
I
we
just wanted to
vote?
make sure, I was going to stand up, and make sure that you did it, in case you forgot.
Should have thrown something at me. I just had me. Please vote on item number 4.
Murray?
Yes.
Klein?
Yes.
Short?
Yes.
OJ?
Yes.
Isabel?
Yes.
Mayor Buckles?
Yes. Item 5 will be pulled for the reason previously stated by the applicant. Thank you, Mrs. Hilton. Item number 6, consideration and possible approval, denial, amendment, and/or revision of recommendation of JZ21 PUD 16.MA3. Is that a big typo?
No.
Oh, okay. PUD 16.MA3, a request by Heather Orbis for a major amendment to PUD 16 to allow for use unit 15 for a veterinary clinic with animal boarding on purposed pad site C, the southwest corner of the lot. General location is West 121st Street and South Elm Street. Mrs. Hilton, we're on page 94.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council, and staff. This is an amendment to a PUD. The original PUD is number 16, and it's part of Yorktown Village. There is one couple of items in that development area. There is South County Square, which has a pizza place that everybody rages about. And there's a couple of other things there. There's also on the hard corner a Casey's. And then last year we approved an amendment that allowed for childcare adjacent to the neighborhood on the northeast corner. So that was called the Learning Center. This is a request for a veterinary clinic. And then ultimately to build a veterinary hospital with boarding available. So the reason I say it like that, a veterinary clinic is allowed by right now. So Dr. Long can go into the stroke center, the South County Square currently, and there is a lease option available. When they brought this to me, I felt like, no, please, so I said no. And we talked about it a couple of times. Ms. Orbis was very good to continue to give me more information and help me better understand. Ultimately, staff met with Dr. Long, and of course at that time, understanding his vision, understanding what he does as a doctor, and what his very specific, very detailed development plan was. And I'm talking specifically about the structure of the building, changed my mind and changed the mind of the other staff, and we were in agreement to help them move this application forward. So his plan, as it is, and he'll talk to you more about this, is to, if the pad site C gets approved for a veterinary hospital that would allow for boarding of patients and patient families, is what I'm calling them now. If it gets approved tonight, then he will continue forward with his lease in the strip center. And I didn't want to just say, sure, go ahead and do the strip center lease, and then sometime down the road, 2 years, maybe we'll approve a hospital. I said, I think it's fair and right, even though you're allowed to go in. I think it's better to have the conversation with planning commission and council up front. Let the public know what you're wanting to do, and then let them decide. So that's how we got here. This particular lot abuts the reserve area of Weston 2 at Wakefield. And then it also abuts all of lot 9 and a part of lot 10. So in reality, this entire pad site C is adjacent to a reserve area, lot 9 and part of lot 10. This was approved 6-1 at Planning Commission on May 6th. Mr. Leon Davis, Commissioner Davis, lives in the area and did not feel that he could vote for the project. Lot split.
Did he voted no, or he abstained? Or?
He voted no.
Okay.
Lot split application has been made, and if this is approved, we'll move forward on the July agenda. On page 3, which is also 96 of the packet, I kind of did a little color diagram, and this is the actual area known as pad site C. And then you'll see up on your zoning map, which is also identified in the packet, a little square. So it's the very southern portion of that. The commercial development is where this is located. And then all of this in green is reserved area. So you can see the entire pad site with the exception of lot 9 and a little tiny bit of lot 10. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Or I can walk. Okay. Same chart. This is chapter 10, use units. On page 97, and this is what I was talking about earlier. If this was straight commercial shopping, then a vet office is use unit 11 and it will be allowed by right. The PUD allows it by right. Commercial shopping allows it by right. But because Dr. Long is very straightforward and he wants you to know that there will be times when he will have non-medical patients there. Planning Commission had a very specific recommendation. They recommended, make sure I'm reading the right.
That it's technically not a patient if it's non-medical, so they'll have visitors.
Yes.
Okay.
I think they said non-medical patients. They
Can't
did, that's
be.
how they worded it.
Oh, so if I go to the hospital without a medical issue, am I considered a patient?
But if you go to the clinic, if
And I'm
you're,
not sick, I'm
if he's
considered.
your doctor and you go visit your doctor, you're still his patient.
Right.
Maybe you're not sick, you just went with your wife. But you can stay the night with her.
So we're talking, the scenario was you have companion dogs or cats that are better together. So one goes to spend time with the other while it's in.
I don't think it's dogs and cats. But
Okay.
yes. So to the mayor's point, non-medical.
We don't have to address that right now. I just wanted to be very clear.
Okay, I can tell you what the planning commission
It's
recommended. Grant
important.
approval of major amendment number 3 of PUD 16 to allow for a small animal vet clinic with pet boarding on pad site C only, allowing up to 20, they said, non-medical patients per night. So,
Visitors.
visitor, correct. Planning commission, staff and TAG do recommend approval of PUD 16, which is a major amendment because they are asking for, and I feel like the word kennel should probably be stricken altogether because it's not a kennel, and that was the public's biggest concern. We had multiple citizens show up and speak, very concerned about a kennel product, and that is not what this is, and I'll let Dr. Long explain that. And I think that we don't even need to use the word, it's just to allow for boarding. So I kind of had rewritten it. If I were probably in your shoes, I would probably say small animal veterinary hospital and clinic with accessory boarding of non-medical visitors. Up to 20 per night. At no time are visitors allowed or patients allowed to enter or exit boarding facility at will. And that's another thing, Dr. Long does not have what you would call a doggy door where the dogs can allow themselves to go out and play around for a while and come back in. So that's all I have to say. We do recommend approval.
And the motion language you're recommending is in the very bottom of page 4, is that correct?
It is, but I just amended it while I was sitting there.
Can you repeat?
Yeah,
Okay.
this is what I think I would at least start with. Staff and Planning Commission recommend approval of small animal veterinary hospital and clinic with accessory boarding on pad site C only. Let me see, medical clinic on pad site C only with accessory boarding of up to 20 non-medical patients / visitors per night. At no time are the patients allowed to enter or exit boarding facility at will.
Anybody write that down? Okay, that's fine.
I got it.
Any questions from the right side of council for Mrs. Hilton? I thought you didn't have a question a minute ago, or you just? Oh, okay. Any questions from the left side of council for Mrs. Hilton? Yes, Mr. Murray.
Okay, so up to 20, and there's no doggy doors. So I assume then they're all non-patient and patient will be kept inside.
Yes, sir.
Overnight, during the day, what will they use for an outdoor facility?
Okay, they do have exercise areas and they are taken out as either the family unit or the individual patient and exercise together. They're at no time, it is my understanding, are they left alone. So they just don't let them out, say, okay, you got 30 minutes, go. They just take them out, observe them because mostly they are patients. I can give you the example that Dr. Long gave me and he can elaborate. He said a lot of times an animal will have severe anxiety if they're separated from one of their family. I'm not a pet person. This is such a hard conversation from one of their.
Well, it's a lot.
Brothers or sisters?
I have one dog that's
Yes.
extremely attached to the other dogs. I take it to the vet. The other one has to go with it.
There you go.
So it is a companion. It could be a cat and a dog. I mean, it's happened, but yeah, it's emotional support because if he's not in the car, one sits there and freaks out and almost has a heart attack. So
And he recognizes that, Dr. Long recognizes that and allows them to come. And so from a very technical perspective, that wouldn't be allowed under the code because we wouldn't allow a non-patient to stay overnight in a kennel.
This may be a question for Dr. Longwear, but you have, now which side of the building are they planning on using for the outdoor run, walk, exercise, whatever? Is that gonna be towards the homes on the south side, the east side, west side?
I'll show you here. So this is upside down, but this is the north end. That's where the learning center is now. That's where Casey's is. This is the residence, and they would put the building itself over near the strip center.
Closer to the
Yeah.
strip center, right?
Yeah.
Now, but then I'm asking, I guess, the dog run or the dog outside exercise area, is that gonna be then on the south side of the
No, it
building?
would be.
On the east side of the building? East, okay, there's more distance
Yeah.
between it and the residence, okay.
Correct.
And then I guess, more technical or getting into it, maybe Dr. Long, are you gonna perform, or maybe wait till you.
Well, we can wait.
I forgot the most exciting part. I toured his facility.
I was gonna ask.
I did, I forgot that. I went through my pocket. These are all photographs that I personally took at Dr. Long's existing facility in Broken Arrow. And he is actually much, much closer to the residences there. And Brandon accompanied me on this. He's had a lot more experience with vets than I have. So his opinion is probably even more important than mine. But when it comes to odor, there's no odor anywhere on the property. And we walked around the entire property. No odor ever at any time. I cannot say that about inside the kennels. So, but I think that's probably normal. The noise level, when we were upstairs in Dr. Long's office, I could not hear the animals at all. There was one time, I think maybe a dog had come in or something, I heard a yelp because it was to my right, and that is where the entrance to the building was. Once we went through the kennel, and the dogs and animals are not allowed to see each other, they have it set up so that they can't, so that they don't get excited. You can't hear, while you're in the kennel, you cannot hear anything on the outside. So you don't know what's going on around you. And then, once we got outside the door, at the door, you can hear a little yipping, but by the time you got to the edge of the building, which is 10, 15 feet, there's no noise at all. You cannot hear the pets, period. There's no sound. It's incredible. And it's very quiet upstairs as well. So all of these pictures, he would not be using chain link fence here in Jenks. It's not his preference, but in this case, they're up against a storage facility on one side. So it's very quiet. These are the pictures of the kennels. So this one, there would be 2 rows of kennels and these face the other one. So these little guys don't get to look out their kennel.
What type of fencing is the plan using?
Masonry. Some type of brick, so that something that the dogs can't climb.
Parking? What's the plans for parking?
I think we have a picture in here. Yeah, let me look. Is it in the presentation? He's got a presentation if you want to.
Okay.
We'll get to that, yes.
He's going to answer all your questions and more.
So just to be clear, Mrs. Hilton, on page 103,
Yes, sir.
looking at pad site C,
Yes.
is it your understanding that the building will be constructed on or about where the word pad is, which would be the north portion of the pad, the total
Yeah.
parcel? And the dog run will be to the right or the east side of this diagram? To the right, okay.
Picture.
Any more questions for Mrs. Hilton from the council? Okay, thank you, Mrs. Hilton. At this point, we'll invite the applicant to come forward if you'd like to, sir. State your name, address for our record, we would very much appreciate that.
Yes, my name's Kevin Law. I live at 12625 South 198 East Avenue in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. I want to take this opportunity to thank the council for hearing. I'm going to try to keep it as short as I can. I can't talk too much, so just tell me if I'm going on too long. I spent a long night already. I'm excited about this opportunity. I'd like to thank Marseille and Brandon for coming to my facility and giving us an opportunity to show them and the staff of Jenks what we're about and why we're different from what you might think about when you think about veterinary hospital. We certainly had a good discussion at the planning commission meeting where we heard the concerns of the neighbors, tried to address those immediately. But we didn't have our PowerPoint presentation that night, which we do tonight, which I do think is going to help immensely for you guys to get an understanding what our mission is, what our business model is, and what has made us successful in Broken Arrow. I'm personally very proud of our facility. I'm proud of the doctors that work for me, and very proud of the staff that we have. I think we have grown to be the largest veterinary hospital in Broken Arrow, and that's not by accident. My staff is amazing, guys. By no means my doing. I'm very proud of them. We built a wonderful facility. You can see over here that is a picture of our facility. We didn't start out there. We started out on a little strip center about a half a mile down the road. It was my first clinic that I've ever opened on my own. Wanted to make sure it was going to work before I invested millions in it. It did work. It worked extremely well, and we were blessed with a burgeoning business that allowed us to purchase some land that is actually extremely similar to the land that we're talking about today. That I built this freestanding building in which we've been in around 5.5 years now. But again, the quality of service that we want to provide to Jenks, we believe is second to none, but also the quality of the presentation of our business. We take that very seriously. I take branding very seriously. I take my business very seriously. And so that's something that we worked on from the very beginning, and that's what hopefully our business is set apart from that. We have operated in proximity to a neighborhood which with a very similar setup. We've had any complaints from our neighbors, no complaints from the cities, the city of Broken Arrow. We've taken a tremendous amount of steps to go through to make our building incredibly friendly to the neighbors around us. That was a big deal to me in the very beginning. The city of Broken Arrow made sure it was a big deal. We took it very seriously. We're going to go through a presentation that's going to kind of talk through what we have done at that site. Keep in mind, this site in Jenks is superior to my site in Broken Arrow. Couple reasons. In the Jenks site, we actually have a large, I guess it's detention pond, not retention pond. I think it's that term for years, but a pond in the neighborhood. So we actually have a huge buffer in between my clinic and the neighborhood that I don't have in Broken Arrow. Even now, with that being said, the business, the site plan, which I'll have to apologize ahead of time, it's literally just me drawing what I plan to do there. But you'll be able to see that we've taken care of answering some of the questions you had asked. Where is the building going to be? Where is the parking lot going to be? Where is this dog run going to be? And that's another point of emphasis. We are a medical hospital. We are a veterinary hospital. We are not Woodland West. We are not River Trails. Those are very wonderful facilities. They do an amazing job of what they do. They are boarding facilities first, veterinary hospitals second. Now, they still do great veterinary work, but they are a boarding facility first. They have 200 runs. We have 20. We focus on medicine, surgery. That's what we do. So the amount of space in our exercise yard literally is a enclosed area where I can have my patients go in and out on a leash with supervision to obtain samples, to get this dog up and moving from anesthesia to warm it up. It is not to go out and do playtime. We are not a resort. We wouldn't even use that term. We are a medical facility. We don't offer playtime. We don't sell playtime. And everything you see about my facility is very different. It's very sterile. I mean, that's the medical term. It sounds like a bad term, but it's actually what we're trying to do. It's very sterile. It's very clean. It's very organized. That's because all of our patients are there for usually a medical or surgical purpose. So I want to just emphasize that that's the biggest difference, that I don't even think I can understand the neighbor's concern about wondering if a gigantic Woodland West is going to come into their backyard. I get that. I wouldn't want that either, but that's not what we are. There are many reasons why I wouldn't want to do that. A, it's a horrible use of the space. This is not a large lot. You couldn't build a kennel on this lot if you wanted to. You wouldn't have room for parking and or a building. It literally is built, the size of the lot that we're looking at is literally best use for the facility that we're talking about using it for. You just don't have the room to do that. So before I keep going, let's, if we can, Brandon, if we can go on to the presentation. So this is a overhead view of my clinic as it stands right now. So you'll see the L-shaped parking lot in the building. You see how the neighborhood is on, I guess on the south side here. I'm bad at directions, sorry. The south side, you can see how I positioned my parking lot to separate myself from the neighborhood as best I could. The unique structure on the left and the north is actually the storage facility. They're actually built directly on the property line. I bought the property from them. That's why it's a little bit of a unique setup, but it actually provided exactly what we needed, which was a very small but incredibly enclosed exercise area for me to use my patients. We have a mason wall on the north side and then an 8-foot high double-sided privacy fence on the south side. We do that again to ensure we maintain security. My biggest fear as a veterinarian, as a business owner, is that road is Lynn Lane, and there's a lot more cars out there on that picture. And I have never had an animal escape, and I never will have an animal escape, because that's a hard conversation to have with a patient. Just reiterates why we built the facility and why we took security and those things into account. But that's the general layout of the building. One thing you'll notice, let's see, if you look on the south side of south roof line of my building, we specifically didn't put any windows there. We have offices in the second floor of our building. We didn't put windows there because we wanted to be respectful of our neighbors to the south, the neighborhood. They have a pool there. Nobody wants people looking into their neighborhood or their yard. So we specifically did that. Again, our dog areas were positioned as far away from as they could be from that facility with soundproof barriers as best we could. As Marseille said, she was on the outside of our building with a kennel, 10 feet away on a busy Monday. Couldn't hear the dogs. We could hear the street, but we couldn't hear the dogs. That's by design. Go to the next slide, right? This is just kind of, again, it's just some of the things that, and I apologize, I'm a horrible photographer. We were required by the city of Broken Arrow to put up trees along that fence line for greenery. We did that. When they died, we planted more. Because we didn't just go, oh, they died, you know what? No, they required that, so we did it. We put more up. We have special LED lighting that only faces down, so there's no lighting issues into our neighbors' yards. Again, we don't want to do that. The AC units were put on the top of the building to minimize noise from air conditioning units, and I've got 6 of them, so they can be noisy. We don't want the neighbors to hear that. Brandon, you can go to the next slide. This is the outside exercise area. The chain link fence is misleading because the chain link fence is to create a barrier inside. The outside world can't see that even exists. We do that for our benefit so that we can keep a dog out of this area because the grass is being worn down, or we have some water flowing that doesn't flow. I should have talked about this guys earlier. But that's why we did that. Again, you cannot tell that there are dogs in those areas at all. I don't want the outside world to see them. I don't want them to see the outside world. That's just not what we do. So again, it's very sterile. You will notice that there are no inside-outside doors. We're not Woodland West. Your dog can't choose to be inside or outside at 1 a.m. It has no choice. It has to be inside, enclosed in a very special kennel. You can go to the next slide. This is a picture of my kennel. Again, very sterile. It's not very friendly looking. The walls are actually double studded thick with foam insulation. That's why you can't hear anything. We did that because we knew we would have dogs in there and I would need to conduct business in there, have a meeting with Marseille and be able to actually hear us think. We actually got a lot of benefits out of it. We didn't even realize it at the time, but not only can we not hear the dogs, they can't hear the outside world. So when a fire engine goes by or fireworks go by, they can't hear it. So even though our boarding facility has 25 runs in it, 26, I think, we don't have a large facility, but we have a nice little niche of people that come to us and say, hey, my dog's deathly afraid of fireworks. Can I board in your facility? Yeah, that's a good reason for it. My dog needs insulin twice a day. My dog needs insulin shots twice a day, or my dog has seizure medication. Those are the bulk of our boarding patients. We can't compete with Woodland West. I don't sell playtime. I don't have a lot of beautiful playground equipment for dogs to run across. I don't want to compete with them. They do that very well. That's their business model and they excel at it. I have no desire to do that. That's not what we want. We don't have space for that. So this space is, and what you can't tell is the space literally has epoxy walls on the floor, ceiling, everything, so that it is completely clean. Yet again, was yet another sound barrier. It provides where the place is unbelievable how it controls sound. It's really kind of amazing. We covered the no access to the outside walls or the outside world. Again, when our dogs go out, even if, like in your case, if you have two dogs that come in and one can't do without the other, just because the normal one, the non-medical one is with it, it doesn't mean that dog gets special medical treatment. Says, oh, well, let's let this dog stay outside for 3 hours. No, we have rules. Every dog gets to go outside for 15 minutes at a time. Woodland West is a better boarding facility than I am. They're better. Your dog will be happier there. I will say that every day of the week. My job as a veterinarian, as a business owner, is to bring your dog back in better condition than you left it with me. It's safe, it's cared for, its medical and surgical needs are attended to. That's why we dedicate such a little footprint for boarding. But as I talked to Marseille about this process from the beginning, I never wanted to get into a situation where I was doing something that was against what the PUD or the code allowed. I was very evident when I was in Broken Arrow. I was going to make sure I always played by the rules. And so that's why we're going through this process. We know that we're already allowed to have a veterinary clinic there. I can do that. I mean, it's in the PUD. I can buy that land and do that. But I want to give myself the latitude in order to be able to do a little bit of medical boarding or a dog that needs to be this other one and do it our way, not anybody else's way, but our way. We understand that during the planning commissioning meeting, the neighborhood may not understood that. And rightly so. So much so that when they brought that up and they were concerned about, well, what if he changes his mind? What if he wants to have 150 kennels like that Woodland West? Well, we immediately stepped forward and said, we'll cap it at 20. That was our idea. We did that on the spot because we wanted to show them, hey, we're good neighbors. I get it. You don't know me. So my word doesn't mean much to you right now. But our track record proves that we did, but we wanted to put that in writing. So we were willing to do that because, again, that's not our goal. If someone were to come along and try to turn my facility into a giant boarding facility, they'd have to burn the building down and start over because, again, there's not the physical space to remodel the building. It's not something you can just tear walls down and just start it over again. So our purpose, what we're designed for, really is very, very specific in what we do. Brandon, I don't know if there's any more slides left. This just kind of goes shows it's just the double-studded walls that we have the foam insulation. That's kind of hard to tell there. Brandon, I don't know if there's anything else. So this is again, I apologize drastically for my horrible drawing. This is the site plan on the right of what we would want to do. You can see that the parking would be on the right side and then towards the street, the building, and then the extended outside play, or that little outside play area, which would be a 7 to 8 foot high brick wall. In the nature of, it would look like our building facade. It would be stone, brick, something. I don't want dogs digging out, climbing up, or anything. It needs to be Fort Knox, just big enough for us to be able to get our dogs out there and do what we got to do. And I think you guys, I'm going to stop talking, give you guys questions. I know you guys will have some, and I want to do my best to answer all of them.
Thank you, Dr. Long. Any questions from council on the right side? Any questions from council on my left? Councilor Short.
I just want to thank all of you for the diligence throughout this fascinating process in the last day or two to understand a little bit more. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Long. So much.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm sorry, I appreciate the information and design. I'm a cat person, so you're not going to take care of cats?
I'm a cat.
Okay,
I grew up with cats.
We talked about dogs. So
No. Cats boarding is very different because they literally have their own little special inside area that is outside. They don't want to see the outside world anyway. So
I guess you're going to perform surgeries there. Obviously, that's the part of this. What's the process, whether it's a state governing agency that says you have to dispose of parts, body parts, or organs, or feces, or whatever, how is that going to happen, or how are you going to be able to do that?
It's a great question. So we We have our own private disposal company. We don't use city trash. We will have a service that does that. Part of that is because some of the stuff that we dispose of will be needles in special needle containers that are all approved by, that you just don't give to city trash. So we've never had, even Broken Arrow, I don't use city Broken Arrow trash. I pay for it, but I don't use it. As far as the disposal of animals, the feces and everything, that is disposed of with the same service, but again, we don't have odor issues there. There are no animals that are ever put in the trash in my facility. That's one thing that is it's a very big deal for me. We use a crematory service. So even if a Boy Scout brings in a turtle that was hit by the car, that turtle is cremated. Every animal that is brought to any of my facilities are cremated. So we've never had a medical waste odor or issue or anything like that. I guess you could say if we, body parts that are removed during typical veterinary procedures, I mean, those are disposed of just like anything else. But again, with our facility, it's not city trash. It's a private issue there.
Hours of operation.
Great question. Another good question. So at our current facility, we're open 7:30 to 5:30. We're probably going to expand from 7 to 7. We have no desire, never will be a emergency hospital that's open on late. You have literally the finest emergency hospital in the state of Oklahoma for veterinary purposes 2 miles away. It's owned by a friend of mine. They do amazing work. One of our attractions of this site is that we have them as a partner and we get to use them. So our hours will always be what you would consider to be a classic veterinary hospital. It's open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. At its latest. We will never be open on Sundays. That is something I don't believe in and we never will do. Saturdays we might be open till 5. That's what our current Broken Arrow plan will be. Is still, but you should not even know we're there after 7 o'clock. Like our Broken Arrow neighbors, like we lock that place down. We lock it down, we leave. You don't even know that we exist. And when we leave, there are no lighting issues. There are no issues with neighbors, anything. We literally walk away. And that's what we plan on doing here.
Staffing, you don't have someone that stays overnight because the animals, maybe having to keep up with them.
No.
IVs or things like that.
When that is required, we transfer them to the facility and change that I was talking about. So if we have an animal that is critical, that needs IV fluids for critical life saving, we'll do that. But if they're otherwise stable, they can stay in our facility. Yes, we have these cool cameras where we can literally watch them from our cell phones all night long. It's kind of amazing what we can do. But if the animal's that critical, then no, it's always transferred to OBS or one of the facilities just for safety's sake.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So there are no employees that theoretically should be there after 7 p.m.
No, and if they are, I find out because my phone keeps.
What's the average length of stay for a patient?
It really depends on the dog. Like if a dog with parvo comes in, I mean, it could be there for 5 to 7 days. Whereas a cat that gets neutered goes home that afternoon. Generally speaking, you're not going to probably have a medical patient that is there. I mean, we had a 180-pound tortoise there for like 2 days, which was a unique thing. But realistically speaking, most of the stuff we're either going to get a handle on or it's going to have to be referred to a specialty hospital. So I would think 7 days. But again, medical and surgical patients, generally, we try to get those better and get them out.
Okay. Now, the Planning Commission approved this on the condition that you have only 20 non-medical animals boarded at any given time. So 4th of July, are you telling us that you'll accept no more than 20 dogs there for the sake of keeping them in a soundproof environment?
I'm not going to build it to where I'll be able to hold any more. See, medical boarding, what do you describe that? So being afraid of fireworks is actually a really big deal. And for some people, that is an absolute reason to have their dog boarded at my facility. Same thing if you have a dog that's afraid of fireworks, but is also an epileptic. Any type of stressful event, fireworks, anything can actually make epilepsy far worse. So that person's going to choose me. Again, some of these dogs on insulin. Dogs that don't like other dogs. We all watch the Discovery Channel and we see Caesar Milan with his 87 dogs running in a pack. That's not reality. That is fantasy. Those dogs attack each other. Our facility is designed for individualized care. Like you go out, Fluffy, with Fido if you were in the same family, but you guys do not come into contact with this dog over here ever. That is the way we do it. So there might be times when 2 dogs need to stay together and this dog is perfectly healthy. Or Mrs. Jones needs to come in and says, I need to leave right now. Fluffy needs this. Can you board there? When we put that number at 20, we were trying to show the neighborhood without a shadow of a doubt that we'll put that cap there. Because if you're afraid of us becoming Woodland West, not a problem. On the spot, we can say, now, I can't tell you that I'm gonna have 20 of those non-medical and surgical cases. And this is something else I talked to Marcia about. I have 3 hit by car dogs. They're all hit by car, they're critical. I can't kick somebody out because a critical patient came in. And that's why we wanted to have a definition that said, okay, 20 cap for those that are not literally clinging to life in a room versus the other. So we try to give ourselves that flexibility because at the end of the day, again, I don't want to be breaking any rules. I have no intention of becoming the animal boarding magnet of Jenks. That title has been taken.
Are your 20 non-medical residents individually kenneled for the night that they're there, or are they?
So they could be if they want those runs. If I've got 2 dogs that want.
I'm talking after 7 p.m.
Are they?
Where are these 20 residents? These non.
They're in the boarding facility or the kennel room. Again, I think you term kennel as well. In that enclosed area.
In the same typical space as one of your patients.
No, if I have a patient that's on IV fluids, it's probably going to be in a much smaller confined cage. Like we have patients that if they move around post-op critically, it's not good for them.
Okay.
So that dog is going to actually be in our ICU unit, which is a separate part of our hospital where you would find a dog on fluids.
And can you tell us in good faith, because that's all we have,
Yeah.
that your plan is to build this new facility with the same construction quality as this existing one?
Wouldn't do it any other way. It's honestly, it's my brand. My builder hates that big tower that we have in the front because it costs a fortune and it actually serves no purpose. I think it's beautiful.
So since you brought it up, is the existing facility typical of what we might see here?
I plan on saving on architecture fees. I'm trying to use the exact same plan.
I can tell the council that I spoke with the mayor of Broken Arrow about this, and she's been on council for 4 years. And I think she knows everything that goes on in Broken Arrow. Yes. And she wasn't even aware that this place existed, which to me is a good feeling that there's probably not a lot of complaints as it relates to Dr. Long's practice in the city of Broken Arrow. So any more questions from the council for Dr. Long before we dismiss? No more questions. Thank you, Dr. Long. Appreciate you, sir.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll close the floor to our applicant and the council. And if we have any residents that would like to speak on item number 6, please come forward. You gotta go?
No, I understand.
Oh, my apologies. Need anything? Okay. Last call. Any residents like to speak on behalf of item number 6? Fantastic. So we have no public comment. So we'll close the floor to our citizens. And if there's no more deliberation, I suppose we can entertain a motion for item number 6. And I would encourage you to follow Mrs. Hilton's advice and look at the motion as it's stated on the bottom of page. Anybody can help me. The bottom of page 97. Oh, you know what? Before we do that, can you, Mrs. Hilton, can you share with the council some of the discussion that you had with me and maybe others as to, just to be very clear, this is a veterinary clinic is allowed by right. A kennel is not. That's why we're voting on this. Can you explain to the council what potential actions we could take tonight to ensure that if Dr. Long says to hell that I don't want to be a vet anymore and he wants to go be a hydrologist because there's more money in that, what does the next owner, potential owner of this facility, what rights do they have if we pass this evening? And what mechanisms can we put in place to ensure that this doesn't become a future kennel of 100+ animals? I think that's worthy of some discussion, and I've had some residents ask me to bring that up. So we'll address those that are watching on the camera this evening.
Sure, thank you, Mayor Box. The motion, as I read it earlier, would probably, in my opinion, take care of most of that. And I'll repeat what I had said, because the biggest thing I believe, and I'm definitely not the right person to ask because I've had 1 or 2 veterinary experiences in my working life, but not allowing animals to come and go at will is kind of, it seems to me, what kennels do versus a medical facility. And because, like Dr. Long said, your pet will be much happier at a boarding facility because they cater to that desire. So I had suggested, but before I get to the motion itself, the city development staff has a couple of tools that we use. And number one, if someone comes and asks us about a parcel, we're gonna look at the zoning, and if there's a planned unit development, we're gonna send them the planned unit development. So your motion will be the PUD amendment number 3 text will change based on your motion because it currently does not include in the text that was presented. It doesn't include the limit on number of patients, so it'll be amended. And but if you come in, a lot of times people submit a building permit and we ask them to do a change of occupancy. So landlords don't realize that there's a zoning clearance permit process that they should go through every time a tenant changes. It would be monotonous, but it is what the ordinance says. And there's also a change of occupancy. So those are 2 tools that we can use. If you come in and ask for a sign and say, oh, do you have your change of occupancy? Or do you have your zoning clearance permit? And at that time, I can go through and see, so what is your use? What do you want to do? And does that match what's allowed within the PUD? And if it does not, then we have that conversation. Oh, well, I'm sorry to let you know, it sounds like you have a great business, but at this time, you're not gonna be able to move forward unless there's an amendment. You're gonna have a public hearing, et cetera. So we have a couple of tools that we use and can use that will kind of keep things in line with what is approved.
So in your professional opinion, some future council does have mechanisms in place to provide protections to this existing neighborhood should an ownership transfer take place and a future owner decide that this wants to be actually a true kennel or true boarding facility. Okay. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. Any more questions for Mrs. Hilton? Councilor Murray.
The way this, it's going to be designed, there's to the north of there is the entrance into the Yorktown Village area, and then there's the cul-de-sac back there. The cul-de-sac, I guess, will still allow for potential pad B development, and this will not intrude anything on that. Is that pretty much what I understand? Or I would see, I guess, in that.
Right.
Because his entrance would be off of Elm.
Yes.
Okay. And
pad site, or you're coming in through the shared access. They're not creating a new curb cut. They're coming in through the existing access.
Oh, okay, they're gonna use the existing drive that goes into.
Correct.
Okay. So
which is nice also. I prefer they do not have to ask.
In the parking lot on the south side towards the homes, are you doing anything, you're not adding trees or anything that's not part of the amendment or anything like that, correct? I mean, I'm not putting words in your mouth, I'm just asking to see, and is that correct?
So during the site plan review, they are required to provide screening. And so we'll go through that and discuss what their landscaping will look like and what their, so what trees will be required and what type of screening will be required. Because there is a requirement of screening between a residential use and a commercial use.
Okay.
But that's nothing we addressed tonight.
Okay. And the concrete wall will just be on the east side of the building, correct?
Yeah, you won't even know that it's a wall. It will look like an extension of the building, just like you see nice walls on the outside of the upper class neighborhoods that have the stone, whatever we do is our facade, but it'll look like that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mrs. Hilton? Thank you, Mrs. Hilton. Would anybody like to take a stab at a motion for item number 6? Following the guidance on the bottom of page 97.
I will try. This may have to help me, Mrs. Sultan. Sure. Okay, so I recommend approval of major amendment number 3 of PUD 16 to allow for small vet clinic and pet boarding on pet site C, only allowing up to 20 non-medical patients per night. Is there anything else I need to add to that?
Is that in the spirit of the?
I had added, and you can or you do not have to, but at no time are patients allowed to enter and exit boarding facility at will. And I was implying that no doggy doors. You want to?
Should it say hospital instead of clinic? Because
the difference between use
I
unit
did change it to
15
hospital.
and use.
Let's change it to hospital.
Yes, thank you.
And I don't think it's necessary to put the other order.
Okay.
We have your name for the record, ma'am.
Heather Orbis,
You're the attorney.
yes.
Thank you. I'm not doing it. You want to go again?
Oh my God.
That's the only benefit of sitting in this seat is you.
Okay. Recommend approval of major amendment number 3 of PUD 16 to allow for a small animal veterinary hospital with pet boarding on pet site C only, allowing up to 20 non-medical patients per night.
Second.
Thanks, Ron. I'm gonna jump in there.
We have a proper motion and a proper second. Let's vote, please.
Murray?
Yes.
Klein?
Yes.
Short?
Yes.
OJ?
Yes.
Isbell?
Yes.
Fox?
Yes. Item number, and for those of you, we're probably going to take a break right after. We'll take a break before we start the next meeting, okay? Okay, great. Item number 7, request to approve ordinance number 1554 relating to JZ 21 PUD 16.MA3.
So moved.
Second.
We have a proper motion and a second. Let's vote, please, on item number 7.
Murray?
Yes.
Klein?
Yes.
Short? OJ?
Yes.
Isbell?
Yes.
Mayor Fox?
Yes, can I have a motion for item number 8, emergency clause, ordinance number 1554?
To approve.
Yes, proper motion and a second. Let's vote, please.
Murray?
Yes.
Klein?
Yes.
Short?
Yes.
OJ?
Yes.
Isbell?
Yes.
Mayor Fox?
Yes. Item number 9, consideration and possible approval, denial, amendment, and/or revision of recommendation of TUP 21-46, a request by Melissa Torkelson for approval of a temporary use permit to allow for a sale of fireworks. General location is the northeast corner of 106th Street and South M. Mrs. Hilton, page 116.
Got excited that was taking a break.
Yeah, I did.
He teases.
Okay, this is a temporary use permit for a fireworks stand. Mrs. Torkelson has been running this stand since 2012. It is a fundraiser for the band, and they sell Class C fireworks. They are asking to set up June 15th and tear down July the 5th. They are also asking for a second date, December 27th through January the 1st, 2022. So going to the New Year holiday for also to sell Class C fireworks. They've been at the same location, I believe always on this one. So staff has spoken with Councilman Lynn, and she's had questions regarding fireworks sales and stands, et cetera. And Commissioner Brown has also brought up, I have also sent out emails March 19th with a memo outlining those conversations and questions. At this time, Planning Commission and staff do recommend approval. This will be addressed during the comprehensive plan, so the Unified Development Ordinance update, which is taking place sometime later this summer.
You're saying Councilor Lynn's and Mr. Brown's concerns are going to be addressed?
It will be so the fireworks stands I'll bring to the attention of everyone because that has been an issue or at least an ongoing conversation, and food trucks will also be an ongoing conversation.
I would say the topic will be addressed.
Okay.
We don't know that it'll be up to council whether or not the specific
That's-
concern is addressed, but we will address the topic.
Yeah, I will make sure that the topic is brought to your attention, the wording. There will be wording in there and I will highlight it nice and yellow so that you'll know and you can either agree or disagree or make your own recommendations.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions for council on my right? Any questions on my left? We have no questions from Mrs. Hilton. Is there a motion?
I make a motion to consider the recommendation of TUP 21-46, a request by Melissa Torkelson for approval of a temporary use permit to allow for the sale of fireworks. General location, northeast corner, 106th Street South and South Elm.
Second.
We have a proper motion and a second on item number 9. Let's vote, please.
Murray?
Yes.
Klein?
Yes.
Short?
Yes.
OJ?
Yes.
Isbell?
Yes.
Mayor Fox?
Yes. Item 10, consideration and possible approval, denial, amendment, and/or revision of recommendation of TUP 21-47, request by Jenks Fireworks for approval of a temporary use permit to allow for the sale of fireworks, general location being 11608 South Union Avenue West. Mrs. Hilton, page 134.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council, and staff. This is another fireworks stand. A different organization was at this exact same site last year. Staff and planning commission do recommend approval of this application. They are asking to set up fireworks. Their fireworks operation will be June 25th through July the 5th. Sell of Class C fireworks. They'll set up on June 15th and tear down on July the 10th. It passed 7-0. They've been selling fireworks in the city of Jenks since 2012.
Thank you, Mrs. Hilton. Any questions for Mrs. Hilton on my right? Any questions on my left? We have no questions. I'd entertain a motion for item number 10, please.
I move to approve.
Second.
We have a proper motion and a second. Let's vote, please.
Murray? Yes. Klein? Yes. Short?
Yes.
OJ?
Yes.
Isbell? Yes. Mayor Box?
Yes. Item 11, request approval of the award of the B Street Sidewalk, North 5th Street to Riverwalk Terrace Improvements Construction Project to TriStar Construction out of Catoosa, Oklahoma, in the total amount of $97,740.00. Funding for the same project is included in the existing fiscal year 20 to 21 budget Jenks Vision Sales Tax Fund in account number 33-750-5392, also known as Fund 33 Jenks Vision Tax Projects, Building and Improvements. Mr. Cloyd, on page 147.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, staff. Improvements of the B Street sidewalks from Elm Street to Riverwalk Terrace is one of the projects to be funded by the Vision Sales Tax Fund. We've already constructed the section of sidewalk from Elm Street to 5th Street in 2020. The North 5th Street to Riverwalk Terrace portion consists of 304 linear feet, a 5-foot wide concrete sidewalk, handicap ramps, and stripes for crosswalks. The project was advertised on March 22nd. Bids were open on April 16th this year. Staff received 2 bids for this project. And you can see in the table there how the bids came in. The apparent low bidder was TriStar Construction with a base bid of $90,000. However, during the bid review process, it was discovered that there was a discrepancy between the project plans and the bid form that was provided during the bid process. The project showed a difference in quantity of the fencing that was to be replaced. So we asked TriStar, city staff asked TriStar Construction to provide a revised bid showing the correct quantity for the chain link fence. So they provided the revised total bid, which is $97,740. The revised bid is attached to the documents you have for this item. That still is lower than the next highest bid. So staff recommends awarding the contract for this project to TriStar Construction LLC with a revised total base bid of $97,740. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Cloyd on my right? Any questions for Mr. Cloyd on my left?
If approved.
Mr. Murray.
I'm sorry. If approved, when will this start?
We would have to do all the typical things we do with projects as far as getting all the, everything, the bonds and getting the contract signed. So then we get a notice of receipt date. So I'm going to throw out a guesstimate of the next month or 2 months. We can get started.
Yeah, it starts here and goes all the way.
Oh, it starts there.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Councilor Isbell.
On page 147, you reflect the 97,740 amount at the bottom, but then in the next paragraph, staff requests approval of the award of the B sidewalk construction at the amount of 98,165. Can you explain the discrepancy, or are we looking at 97,740?
The discrepancy is a typo. I apologize for that. It should be $97,740.
And we should note that we really have to thank Councilor Isbell because he always finds the discrepancies. Thank you, sir.
I apologize.
Thank you very much.
Apology necessary.
Okay. Any more questions for Mr. Cloyd on the right or the left? All right. If there's no more questions. Is there a motion for item number 11?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a proper motion and a second for item 11. Let's vote, please.
Murray? Yes. Klein?
Yes.
Short?
Yes.
OJ?
Yes.
Isbell? Yes. Mayor Box?
Yes, item 12, request to approve resolution 733 in support of an application to the Indian Nations Council of Governments for federal funding under the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, known as the CRRSAA, for eligible surface transportation program for the improvement of Aquarium Place from Elm Street to Aquarium Drive. This is page 150 in your packet, and it looks like Mr. Cloyd is up again.
The next three items are all connected. These are three projects that, as part of the application process for this funding, INCOG asked for a resolution. So I'm going to give you basically some introduction that will address all three projects, and then I'll go in and just talk a little bit about what each project is. This is for those of you who've been on the council before, you may have heard of STP funding for projects. This is not the usual STP funding program. This is just kind of as it sounds, this is in response to coronavirus and what happened. And so it's just like it says, coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriation. So this is not something we'll see every year. This is something that's just in response to what we recently went through. And the project, so this has been open for the federal fiscal year 2021. The project categories that are eligible are projects listed from INCOG's Long Range Transportation Plan, a Transportation System Management Project, a Safety or Transportation Enhancement Project, or System Preservation of a Transportation Facility. All the projects that I'm going to present tonight are part of that last one, the System Preservation of a Transportation Facility. Another key requirement for projects to qualify for this funding is that they must be used for roads classified as urban collectors and arterials under the Federal Highway Administration functional classification system. However, bridges and active transportation projects such as trails are exempt from this rule, so they can also be part of these projects. Federal funding can be to a maximum of $750,000 per project. And up to 3 projects can be submitted by one sponsor, which all 3 projects cannot exceed $2.25 million altogether. So to meet the application deadlines, applications were submitted to INCOG on May 14th of this year, and supporting resolutions are due prior to June 16th of this year. The 3 projects that the city staff is proposing are Aquarium Place improvements from Elm Street to Aquarium Drive, and I'll talk on each of these just in a little bit more detail as I go through these. 121st Street improvements from Elm to Elwood, and Aquarium Drive Trail from B Street to Elm Street, and Elm Street Trail from 111th Street and Turnpike improvements. So, well, what I'd like to do now is just talk about the first project and then let you vote on that resolution. And then I'll move on to the next project because you have to vote on each resolution independently. So Aquarium Place is classified as a major collector. So it is applicable to this project. Due to the amount of traffic and the type of traffic present on the roadway, numerous street patches have happened resulting from utility repairs and street surface. So that street surface is needing resurfacing. So the project consists of milling and overlaying 2 inches of asphalt across the entire width of the roadway from Elm Street to Aquarium Drive. This project also includes improving the Elm Street intersection by widening it so we can make that intersection a little bit more safer. Design of these improvements is being completed by the city engineering department staff. The total cost of the project is estimated at $748,742.40. which is under the $750,000 maximum, so no additional city funds are requested to be appropriated at this time or in the future. The requirement for the application is to attach the resolution from the governing body indicating support of the project and commitment of non-federal matching funds and ongoing maintenance of the proposed project. So the requested resolution 733, to satisfy that requirement is attached. Is there any questions about this project?
Any questions from the council on the right side for Mr. Cloyd?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Isbell.
To the Elm Street intersection, will there be any right-of-way acquisition necessary to increase the size of the intersection?
No, there's a lot.
Okay, thank you.
And to be clear, this is the right, is this behind the RVs? Is it what we're talking about?
It's by Mabry Bank.
It's in between Mabry Bank and the Arby's parking lot.
It's the one we talked about the other day that nobody sees. Okay. And so the council knows, I guess generally speaking, and I'm kind of addressing one of our citizens who's asked these questions. This is, and correct me, stop me if I'm wrong here. This is part of this multi-trillion dollars in stimulus money that has flowed from the federal government all the way down to our level as a result of COVID-19. And in this particular case, this is money that we have to apply for. And these are three projects that you and city staff have identified as having the greatest need. And all of them are under the $750,000 limit. So theoretically speaking, if we get lucky, we're going to get $750,000 times 3 to accomplish these 3 projects.
That's correct in a certain point.
Yes, sir.
One of the projects is over $750,000. So
good enough.
One of these is going to ship it a little bit more, but yes, we do have to apply for those, and the application is in the packet, and which also shows what they're grading on. So we're in competition with other cities that are also going after this money.
Which one has the cost share, this requirement? This is it 12, 13?
I think it's the next one.
Okay, that's fine.
121st Street.
Okay. All right. Any questions from council on the right for Mr. Cloyd? Any questions on the left for Mr. Cloyd? Mr. Short, Councilor Short.
What is the expected useful life of this lane Aquarium Drive? You mentioned it's a one-time funding. I'm sure there's some factors that could deteriorate the road, but what would your expected useful life of that be?
For this improvement, what I was thinking, 10 to 20 to 15.
Are you I apologize. Are you talking about the life expectancy of the road as it is now?
No,
or after? Okay.
After it's repaired, what would we expect the useful life of this road?
Okay.
That's fine.
And with that, I mean, like where we're at now, we've had people cut across the road with utilities. We've had different things happen on the road, and all those things will reduce that amount over time. So it depends on what development or redevelopment we might have in the area. So I'll qualify my answer with that.
And that's
Any more questions for Mr. Cloyd? All right. We have no more, any more comment? Mr. Cloyd, you finished with item 12?
Yes, sir.
Okay, if that's the case, then I'll entertain a motion for item number 12.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on item 12. Let's vote, please.
Murray?
Yes.
Klein?
Yes.
Short?
yes.
Bojang?
Yes.
Isabel?
Yes.
Mayor Box?
Yes. Item 13, request to approve resolution 734 in support of an application to the Indian Nation Council of Governments for federal funding under the Corona Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act for eligible surface transportation program for the improvement of 121st Street from Elm to Elwood Avenue. 121st Street from Elm to Elwood Avenue, page 170, Mr. Cloyd.
Mr. Mayor, council members and staff, all of the things that I said previously are applying to this project. I want to just talk more detail about the project itself. 121st Street is classified as a minor arterial, so it does qualify for this project funding, this federal funding. Due to the amount of traffic and the type of traffic present on the roadway, the street surface is in need of resurfacing. 121st Street project will consist of overlaying 3 inches of asphalt across the entire width of the roadway from Elm Street to Elwood Avenue. The reason we went with a little bit more thickness is because those that have driven on the roads knows how it's running out. So we've got a little bit more of a indentation on those drive lanes. So we wanted to make sure and cover that. Design of these improvements have been completed by the city engineering department staff. Total cost of this project is estimated at $865,000. So I'm sorry, $865,074. So federal funding is requesting the amount of 89.5% of the total cost. So that's $750,000 would be coming from the federal government, and the city match would be for 10.5% of the cost of the total project, which would amount to about $115,074. No funding is requested to be appropriated at this time, since the project will still need to be approved through INCOG's selection process. When it is determined that the project is awarded for funding by ODOT, the project budget and funding source will be developed for acceptance by City Council at that time. So at this time, the requirement is really just to ask for approval of the resolution, which shows that the city is in approval of the project and for any non-matching funds and ongoing maintenance of those project.
Thank you, sir. Any questions on item 12 for anybody on council, right or left? Yes, sir, Mr. Short.
What would be the construction time on a project like this? Is that
I'd say the best 4 or 5 years out.
no, I'm sorry, once the construction project started.
Well, once it started, okay, that should go for much quicker. That would be for something like this, and it's just an overlay. Recently, we had a Melody Lane overlay with milling and the Tulsa County coming in and overlaying. That took, I think, about 2 to 3 weeks to do that addition. So I would, since this is a straight run, it may not go as long as that. So maybe more like 1 to 2 weeks for this type of operation.
Well, that inspires a question for me. So when you guys, when the engineering staff projects this additional cost, are you guys projecting making your numbers in today's dollars or the 2026 dollars?
Well, it's not, this is not going to be, this will be way before 2026. STP.
Well, I'm saying is, yeah.
STP usually is years out. This is, the funds will be released. I talked with Richard Ferrer and asked him, and he said it would be this year. So there's a potential that if the engineering is complete and we have a go to bid and get a contract.
As long as we don't have to do environmental.
Which we might.
So theoretically, we could start this project and be doing it at the same time we're widening Peoria Elm.
We actually have a lot of major projects that will, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it won't. We've got the Elm Street project is a few years to go yet. This could be done a lot sooner.
So this could be done before we initiate the pain somewhere else. Okay. Yeah. Satisfied, sir? All right, thank you, Mr. Cloyd. If there's no more questions from Mr. Cloyd, we'll entertain a motion on item number 13.
Make a motion to approve item 13.
Second.
We have a proper motion and a second, and I'm Jane. Let's vote, please.
Murray?
Yes.
Klein?
Yes.
Short?
Yes.
OJ?
Yes.
Isabel?
Yes.
Mayor Barnes?
Yes. Final item number 14, request to approve resolution 735 in support of an application to the Indian Nations Council of Governments for federal funding under the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act for eligible surface transportation program for the improvement of the Aquarium Drive and Elm Street trails. Page 198, Mr. Cloyd.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, city councilors, staff. Last summer, INCOG and Trails Condition Index project, where they assessed all of the trails that they have, and some of the trails within the city of Jenks were part of that index. And what we found from that index was that the Aquarium Drive Trail from B Street to Elm Street had index ranging, let me back up. The index was from 1 to 5, 5 being the worst. And this trail had sections that ranged from 2 to 4, 4 being the worst, which 4 is pretty low on the scale. And the Elm Street Trail from 111th Street to the Creek Turnpike had a similar situation where it had sections that ranged from 2 to 4. So based on that, we selected this as a project, and this project would basically amount to consisting of milling and overlaying 2 inches of the asphalt across the entire width of these trails. And the trail project has been designed by the city engineering department staff. The total cost of this project has been estimated to be $625,868.35. So since that amount is under $750,000, 100%, no additional city funds are requested to be appropriated at this time or in the future. This item, again, just request for approval of the resolution. If the city agrees, agrees to the project and request the matching funds and ongoing maintenance for the proposed project.
Any questions from Mr. Cloyd on my right? Any questions on the left? Mr. Short.
So if I'm understanding this, was there another road project this substituted for?
No.
These are the only 3 projects that fit in the criteria.
Yes. And at this, I mean, there were others that if we had more time to consider and analyze, we might have selected, I think, but these 3 came to our mind, especially since INCOG had done this recent assessment on trails, and this would fit into what they would allow for these type of projects. We thought this could be one that would fit that criteria fairly easily.
When's the deadline for the application?
Well, it was last Friday.
Are you, so as your line of thinking, if I'm tracking, did the city staff choose these 3 projects without? Is that where you're going?
I'm more interested to see if there was a road project that was pushed out by this trail project that was more popular.
Sure.
To drive on versus a trail. So I'm just asking that. I don't know if there was a plethora, 10, 20 projects, and this is the 3 that fit into this criteria, or the 4th one that you all just.
So how many road projects under $750,000 did you guys kick to the curb so we could get some better trails?
Well, for being clear.
We didn't kick any to the curb.
I understand.
We have quite a few major street construction projects that will fall in this area, such as these are only approved for arterials or major collector streets. And we have quite a few of those that are already in the design phase right now that are coming down the pike. So, and those, $750,000 would not be very much of that project. They're going to amount to a lot more than that. We're also just so you know, we're in an interlocal agreement with Tulsa County. There's quite a few neighborhood roads that are within that interlocal agreement, which we have another phase coming in, which are street overlays, mills and overlays to improve some of our neighborhood streets. So that's also going along, but a lot of those streets really wouldn't qualify for this project because they're not major enough in other ways.
Thank you.
And I would say these 3 projects we've been talking about including in the budget within the next 2 to 3 years. I mean, we've been talking about 121st. We've been working on the design. I think even when we drove around, when we drove to the South Fire Station, it was mentioned, the potholes, we've fixed that. But, we've been talking internally about 121st. I know that with the amount of water line issues that we've had and development issues on Aquarium Place that, both the people that visit the Chamber of Commerce and anyone that drives, cuts through there to go to the aquarium. We've been talking about that road, and we've been talking about the need to maintain trails so that they don't deteriorate to the condition that the Churchill Trail was. So if we would have just overlaid the Churchill Trail, maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we wouldn't have had to reconstruct it in the manner that we did, I guess, within the last 2 years. We had to go in, and it was to the point that the grass had grown up through the asphalt, and basically so much of the trail had to be reconstructed. It took longer and was more expensive. And so if we actually maintain the infrastructure that we have, like the trail here, by doing some sort of maintenance to it on a more regular basis, we won't let it deteriorate to the point that we have to basically reconstruct the trail. So that's kind of how I think that we came to these projects. And even if we don't get the funding, the federal funding for these projects, I believe that these projects will be coming before you in some form or fashion in the next 2 to 3 years as a recommendation to some sort of maintenance. So that's kind of the methodology, I think.
Yeah. And for those citizens that have asked, that are listening to this meeting or watching it in the near future, and along those same lines of thinking, or the questioning of Councilor Short is, are there roads out there that are in worse shape than this trail? Absolutely there are, but given the requirements and the nature of the funding and the application and the dollar amounts, these are the 3 projects that give us the most bang for our buck, that are reasonably fit into the and to what INCOG is asking us to do. So lots of parameters and lots of things to consider, but these are, I think the council trusts that the staff has selected the 3 best projects that give us the best opportunity to actually win these grants. So I hope that answers the questions for those of you that asked me to ask. Any further questions for Mr. Cloyd on item 14? Is there a motion on item 14?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a proper motion and a second on item 14. Let's vote, please.
Murray,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Short,
Yes.
OJ,
Yes.
Isabel,
Yes.
Mayor Box.
Yes, and Mr. Shrout, would it be acceptable to move your city manager's report to the next meeting?
Yeah.
And Councilor Isabel, can we move your INCOG report till the next meeting so we can take a break?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that being said, yes, sir.
Can we move my report to the next meeting?
I hope so.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So that being said, it is 8:55 PM. Is there a motion to make an adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
A second. We have a motion and a second to adjourn at 8:55 PM. Let's vote, please.
Murray,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Short,
Yes.
OJ,
Yes.
Isabel,
Yes.
Mayor Box.
Yes, let's reconvene at 5 after.
This regularly scheduled meeting of the Jenks Public Works Authority. It's still Tuesday, May 18th, 2021. The time is 9:05 p.m. It appears we're all here. Let's please call attendance, Mr. Mason.
Here, Klein, George, here, OJ,
Here.
Kaylin, Isabel, Chair Box.
Here, let the record reflect that Councilor Lynn absent from the Jenks Public Works Authority meeting. Trustee Lynn, rather. All right, business item number 1, consideration of appropriate action to approve the consent agenda. Any motions? Seconds, please.
So moved.
Second.
We have a proper motion and a second to approve item 1, the consent agenda. Let's vote, please.
Murray? Yes. Klein? Yes. Short?
Yes.
OJ?
Yes.
Isabel?
Yes.
Chair Box.
Yes, consent agenda is approved. Item number 2, we will pull. Let's start off with Mr. Shrout, General Manager's Report, page 89, if you're following along.
Chair and all members of the authority, you have the weekly engineering report in your packet. I was going to touch on the coronavirus relief funds that the city has received and that we anticipate receiving. The first amount of money that we received last calendar year was, I think, related to the CARES Act, and it was through the county. Robert Sauceda?
State.
I thought we received $150,000 from the county. Yeah. So we received $150,000 from the county for COVID-related expenses. Later, I believe in October, we received $1.8 million in CARES Act funding from the state of Oklahoma. And with the, obviously with the city council meeting, there's money related to infrastructure through INCOG and STP funds. And we anticipate American Rescue Plan Act funds coming most likely in the next couple of months. And due to our population size being less than 50,000, we will receive our allocation from the state once they receive the funds from the Treasury Department. OML estimates Jenks allocation to be $3.82 million. And I don't know that we've received an update recently from the state, but they were supposed to receive their allocation from the Treasury Department on May 10th, and then they had 30 days to disperse those funds with one 30-day extension. So hopefully we'll receive that money by sometime in July. And the funds must be used to cover qualifying expenses during the cover period, which ends December 31st, 2024. Qualifying use of the $3.82 million is respond to public health emergency with respect to COVID-19 or its negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofits, or aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality for the provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue in revenue due to the public health emergency relative to revenues collected in the most recent full fiscal year, to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure, or include premium pay for eligible workers performing essential work during the pandemic. That's really all we have so far. We're waiting on additional guidance from the Treasury Department, but that's what we can use that money for. I think staff is going to have some recommendations once we have further guidance. And so that's basically, in a nutshell, the funds that we've received and that we're aware of related to the COVID relief, all this money that's been printed. Is that good?
Thank you, sir. Anything else other than money?
Well, just briefly, I think some of you probably saw that the city of Tulsa was hacked in some way and had some IT issues. And I know that both the numerous council members have asked about our IT. And I think that if any members of council want to have one-on-one conversations with Carrie or in small groups, he'd be more than happy to go over our IT infrastructure and the security that we have in place. But we have been working, that is something we have been working on. So he would make himself available to discuss that. We recently had our auction, our city auction, and we collected $150,000, which is significantly more than we thought we would bring in. $64,000 of that came from the sale of the old water meters that we recently replaced. So if you have any additional questions or comments, I'd be more than happy to discuss them.
Councilor Isbell, did that perk your interest on the topic of InfoSec?
Of course it did.
You want to talk tonight, or do you want to save your discussions for Mr. Vincent?
I'll discuss it with Mr. Vincent.
Okay.
And see what current status is and our plan for the future.
And for the sake of those of interest, don't know where it was reported, but it may have been the city of Tulsa, but ransomware it's not the first time a city has been a victim of ransomware. I can say that my wife has a fairly extensive information security background, and what happened to City of Tulsa is disastrous, to say the least. And it was if something along that lines happened to a One Oak or a Magellan, that would never ever be acceptable. Obviously, those companies have stakeholders and shareholders that wouldn't tolerate those kind of events. So it came to my attention pretty quickly that the city of Jenks, the attackers tend to look for targets that are more than likely going to pay. So the first thing I thought is, if I'm one of those potential attackers, the city of Jenks is probably a pretty decent target that most folks would look at our city and assume that our city would likely pay a ransomware attack. So it became curious to me and Councilor Isabel as well, who comes from an IT background. So I think it's worthy of a secondary discussion, and I think it's something that I don't want to see this conversation disappear. And Councilor Isabel, if you'd like, please feel free to take the lead on that and update us if you have any concerns about our InfoSec response, whatever the case may be.
I've spoken with the security structure at Magellan and got some guidance with respect to what we could do, should do, and I'll proceed and report back with information.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Box fest.
Yes, Councilor Short.
Is that something that's insurable? I don't know.
Yes.
Ms. Dillon?
Yeah, we have whatever you call it, the insurance.
We do. You have a policy in place?
Yeah.
We are working with Tedford on getting crypto or cybersecurity insurance with the effective date of July 1st. We had to implement some new or update our systems in order to comply with what the underwriter was requiring, and that took some time, but we are getting to that point.
So we've had to upgrade hardware systems?
Yes.
Okay. Are those, has that been done?
Yes.
Yeah, and part of the reason, I mean, I asked Teresa if we could discuss this in executive session because it's like, talking about our security and what we have or haven't done, we didn't really want to have much of a discussion in an open meeting about our IT security. And I don't really know enough about it to know where the line is that what we should or should not be talking about.
Okay.
But
good point. All right. Thank you.
And with respect to the city of Tulsa, their utility billing system was compromised, and they had to set up all new accounts. And with respect to the work they're having to do to get people back online and paying bills, it is above and beyond what you would have for insurance, I would assume. I don't know, and that's a question for legal, but I'd rather be prepared and prevent it from happening than have to come in after the fact and fix it.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I also agree with Mr. Shrout that this is probably not a good time to discuss our vulnerabilities in public, so we can do that. Very good point, by the way. All right, Mr. Councilor Isbell, let's go ahead and you do your INCOG report if we can, please, sir.
Sure. Our last INCOG meeting was last Tuesday, May 11th. I'm going to go over some of the agenda items that we discussed there. They kicked off the air quality report at the ozone. There is a new website for that. It's tulsaairquality.com. And with respect to ozone days in the metro area, last year we only had one. And that was obvious because everybody was working from home. Our numbers are based on a 3-year average, and that buffers us going forward, but still, ozone awareness is very important. The INCOG group also gave us a coronavirus update. Dr. Dart talked to us in the meeting, and he anticipated the inoculation of 12 to 15-year-olds would become effective by last Thursday, and that happened. So now we have even more people available to receive the vaccine. The transportation program, the Transportation Improvement Program from INCOG approved 7 projects for sidewalks, bicycle signage, ADA compliance, etc. The only one really close to the city of Jenks was the River Parks Trail from River Spirit Casino to 96th Street Bridge. They're going to improve that in the coming months. The ODOT projects that were discussed, repairs to Rogers County State Highway 266 rehabilitation east of Tulsa County, the advanced acquisition of parcels of land identified as total take for the I-44 and US 75 interchange in the total of $10 million. The interstate resolution encouraging, this one's really neat. They proposed an interstate resolution encouraging Congress to designate US 412 as an interstate highway from I-35 in North Oklahoma City to I-49 in Arkansas. It currently meets interstate design standards and is serving 2 ports on the McClellan Arkansas River navigation system, as well as I-35, I-44, and I-49. We're looking forward to seeing this progress on that. Tulsa is now a major metropolitan area, and it only has 1 interstate highway, so this will be a second one and a plus for our metro area.
And that's because we just went over 1 million people, correct?
Correct. I'm sorry, I should have said that. Our census information put Tulsa Metro over 1 million in population. They also discussed the 911 mapping and master street and address guide maintenance for the area communities. Our portion is roughly $4,000, up 10% from the previous year. That's just a bill for us. They named the rest of the communities that we're paying for the 911 mapping as well. We also went over some expenditures for various projects throughout the metro area, and they proposed the increase of the Tulsa Transportation Management Area, TMA, including areas by Kellyville, east of Inola and Claremore, and Manford, increasing the metro area for transportation with respect to seniors, veterans, low-income families. And that's all I have. Are there any questions? We did not really go over any bills at all. I did receive a CTAG bill assignment if anybody is interested in some of the more recent bills. Questions, comments?
No, sir. Thank you, Councilor Isabel. All right, a monthly chamber report, Mr. Josh Driscoll. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the authority, pleasure to be here tonight. I'm going to present on hydrology and what I know about it. All right. Yeah, very short conversation. Rain comes down and it goes somewhere. I do want to thank you for your voting to approve the application for the Aquarium Place Elm Street interchange and Aquarium Place is someone who drives that every day. It is a awful stretch of road, and that intersection it's a religious experience every time someone turns it. So you've seen our written report here, but just a few things on here to highlight. We met last month with Kurt Roberts, who represents a lot of property at 2900 West Main by Highway 75. So that was a good conversation, kind of what they're looking at, what they're moving forward on. And we continue to reach out with our developers, realtors, keep a good conversation, good relationship going. So that's been a good thing to go with. I talked to several of you about a regional retailer. We won't say it here because they haven't signed anything, but it's looking like the retailer that we mentioned in the report is going to be signing with Riverwalk at least here pretty soon. So that'll be a nice draw there as well. We're also working with the Darden Restaurant Group, and we've discussed that in the petition, but they'll potentially be in town as possible last week, it's possible this week. So it's a gamble every week to see if we're going to get it or not, but they keep saying they're going to be in town to look at the sites. We were all aware of our meeting with the Lieutenant Governor and with ODOT, so thank you to everyone who came to that. Something that wasn't a report, that there's not a lot of takeaways from it right now. We met with Mayor Box. Chris was there, yeah, Chris was there, and then I met with Karen Key, Tulsa County Commissioner, and Vince Trinidad, the Tulsa County Parks Director, about the future of South Lakes and kind of what they're looking at there. I think it was a good conversation. We expressed our desire for more investment there to clean up, especially the clubhouse area and make some improvements. So we'll see how that goes.
Can you tell the council what was the general ask of the county parks department to us?
Yeah, the general ask, it was a little vague for a while, but they're interested if the city of Jenks would be able or willing to put money into it. In my later conversation with Commissioner Keith, I expressed that I don't know that any of us are excited about the city putting money in a county facility, but she seemed to think that the county, along with some private donors, could make some of the improvements we discussed. So the biggest thing there is anybody been to the golf course there, been to the clubhouse? Yeah, it's not a fun experience. The golf course is beautiful. The clubhouse is not. And they acknowledge that. They wanted to upgrade the pro shop, restaurant, restrooms. I think our preference was bulldoze and build something that, looks like it was built in the last 30 years. So,
right.
So, just a quick thing too, we're moving forward on Shark Wahoma 2021. This will be our third year. We're hoping we don't get catastrophic flooding or a pandemic this year. So cross your fingers that we actually get to have it full blown. We are working on a couple of new events to that we think could be a nice tourism draw. One of them, have you guys ever seen the cities that do the rubber duck races where they dump all these rubber ducks in a river and they float them, where you can actually buy sharks, rubber sharks. So we're looking at that. Working on some technical details where we can do it. If we can't use the existing body of water, can we create something temporarily that works? So we think that'll be a nice fun draw. For the young professionals in the audience, we had our second event. We're having our third one coming up here pretty soon. I don't know the calendar. I'm not going to guess because I'm off the roll.
There's no young professionals.
Well, what is online? Young at heart.
Up here.
Yeah.
Mr. Macy.
But
Correct,
our
that's
last
right.
legislative.
You're right. I apologize. I looked over and I saw Craig's hair color and moved down. I saw his goatee and I just, wow. I know how old they are.
Last legislative breakfast of the year is going to be May 28th.
I'm sorry.
So you're welcome to join us at that 7:30 a.m. at the Hive. And just once again, for those who weren't on our trip to the Capitol, I did include our briefing document from that, just so you know we were working on the image of the city. That's going to be something I have. I'll be glad to entertain questions, or you can quiz me on my knowledge of engineering.
No, thank you. Appreciate your update, though. Thank you very much. Couple things from me. A couple days ago, I had asked Councilor Short and Vice Mayor and the City Manager to review this packet of information. I spoke the night you guys asked me to be your mayor. I talked about the importance of a strategic planning session. It's centered around the idea of us getting off site. And for those that keep asking, that are not here, that are watching, it will be a public meeting. It will not be in this building. Should the council choose to support this, rather, the idea is that we will be off site somewhere convenient and accessible to you. And if you would like to show up, you will not be acknowledged, or we will not ask for public comment. This will be, the idea is for the 7 members of council and for the most senior members of staff, assistant city manager, the city manager, and probably our finance director and our Chamber of Commerce director to get together and talk high level about what is our goal, what is our strategy, to make sure that when we walk out that we all can at least acknowledge that to some extent we're on the same page. There's not a good company anywhere that doesn't do this at least every couple of years. And I think with this current council that we have, I look at this as we're running a business to some extent. And we are accountable to not shareholders, but we are accountable to our citizens and how we spend their money. And I think if they knew that we're all running in 7 different directions with 7 different leaders, that's something that they can't get behind. So for those of you that I've asked to review this, I would appreciate if you would give this your due diligence and give me your honest thoughts. I'd also like you to do it as well. Did I give you one already? If you could take this home and give me your thoughts. I'm asking you guys to spend their money, but I only want, if you think it's worth it, then let's get together and let's vote on it very soon, because it's going to be difficult for him to get all 7 of us plus him and him and him and him and her. Yeah, you too. And you all together for 6 to 7 hours on one day. And I don't want to do it. If I pointed at you and I want you there, and it's not going to work if you're not there. So that's a difficult, tall ask. And I would hope we could do it as soon as possible, because I really meant when I said a couple weeks ago, I think we have a really good opportunity. We're a pretty united group. And I want to make sure that we come together and that we're all focused on the same things, and our citizens hold us accountable to do that. And I'm sorry for those citizens that our past leadership didn't get this done. We've been talking about this for many mayors now, and I don't think we've been able to do it, but we just have to give up 6 to 7 hours to do this. So let me know your thoughts on this, and I'll leave that here for you, sir, when we convene. We formed a couple of committees last time. Is there any update from our Capital Projects Committee, which our chair is Vice Mayor Oje? Anything you'd like to share?
Not at this time.
Okay. The Economic Development Committee is chaired by Councilor Lynn. We have not, I am on that committee. We have not had a formal meeting, but I can say that we have had some informal last-minute discussions that are led and requested by Councilor Short. Most of that information is of a confidential nature, so we won't be discussing it tonight. Moving on for a Budget and Finance Committee, which is chaired by Councilor Isbell. I guess we have a meeting coming up this week.
Yes, Thursday.
Okay, so your Budget and Finance Committee, which is this gentleman, that gentleman there, myself, and the Vice Mayor as an alternate, Thursday at 4:30. We can all make it. Public Safety and Ordinance Review Committee. And Councilor Murray, if you ever want to change that name, you can. I probably came up with that at midnight. Councilor Murray is our chair, and he probably does have an update for us.
We have not had a formal meeting, Mayor, but I've had a couple of informal meetings, both with the police department and with the fire department. The police department just talked about a few odds and ends things that they are also kind of looking at doing some stuff. I think with code enforcement, kind of looking at areas there that need some updates and some help with. And then with the fire department, I was invited to a meeting with the chief and a couple of captains and with a representative from the Oklahoma Insurance Department that came to discuss our ISO rating. And
can you explain that for all the laymen?
I'll have to ask the chief what the ISO, I don't remember I didn't write it down, what ISO actually stands for. Insurance Services Organization. Okay. And we have recently been, or just found out, or something happened, that we are a 4 on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, 1 being the best. With the cities that we join on the 4 rating are Skytook, Pahuska, Coweta, Turley, and then some 3s, Bixby's a 3, Glenpool is a 2, and Tulsa is a 1. For every ISO rating that you increase, meaning from like 4 to 3, is a 5%, theoretically a 5% reduction in insurance costs for homeowners and for businesses. And we basically meet a lot of the criteria of these point system. It's a 105.5 point system. Is perfect, and we meet a lot of them to get enough points, but unfortunately we are lacking in one area, in that the biggest area is manning level. Our manning level is bad, and the way it looks that we could actually be dropping to a 5 or even I guess a 6 potentially, based on that and a few other criteria. But manning level is one of the biggest things that's something we're going to really have to look at as a council on a budget. I know a few years ago, I even brought it up on the budget discussions that the fire department, the police department asked for additional manpower, and we approved it. The fire department asked for it, and it was removed. and I questioned it, and it was a budgeting level, a budgeting concern. So that's something we're going to have to really look at for our citizens and our businesses that we are in dire need. And it gets into a lot of other things that 60% of the city has to be covered by an auto aid, not a mutual aid. A mutual aid is where you sign an agreement that Glen Pool will come in and help if we call them for a fire. But an auto aid, the way I understand it is, if a house alarm or major alarm fire goes out, they are automatically contacted without having to go through a captain or a chief requesting their aid. And that helps to get us higher points. And also part of it is being able to respond within 5 miles. The fire station has to be within 5 miles of residency and city limits. Well, Station 2 is as far south as we go, and Station 1 is as far north as we go. And we've got residents and businesses that extend past that. Now, we do have an agreement with Kimberly Clark, and we will respond there, but they don't necessarily come and respond on us. Is that the way I understand it, Chief? And I guess they could be a mutual aid maybe. So something that we need to look at, and it'll be brought up more, and that's just kind of just a teaser out there, that something to be concerned about, because we all live here, and if our homes or businesses are in jeopardy, we could have some real issues.
What is our authorized versus actual manning level at the fire department right now? Authorized versus actual.
That's something the chief, I'd have to refer to the chief on it.
Chief, you don't have to get up if you don't want to. Just
if you sit here, you know better. We are actually fully staffed with the new hires have replacements. So we are authorized at 18 total. That is our full staffing level as far as what we apply for. Daily, so that's spread over 3 shifts. So that's 6 people per shift. Our minimum staffing after vacation and sick leave, we maintain a minimum of 4 for the entire city, 4 people, 2 each station.
Do all that, does that criteria also play into our ISO rating?
Oh,
because
yeah,
ISO, it's great that we have full-time authorized, but does ISO say, hey, we think you guys should have 23? Did they go that far?
Well, I don't think they actually dictate it. And again, this is something the chief knows more about than I do, but I know that our reserves or volunteers, they do count, but it's like a half-person point as opposed to a full-time person. And so that can make a difference too. But I think there's also, if they respond to the medical part doesn't fall into the ISO part, but I'm just saying, if our fire department responds to a medical situation, that I think medically they have to have at least X number of paramedics or trained people that can do CPR or perform something. And if we have minimal manning level of 4, we don't need it.
Yeah, ISO is strictly for structure fires. So it's a structure fire response criteria. It's based on NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Association. They set out guidelines. They're not a legislative agency, so they cannot fine us if we don't maintain those, but that's in the industry standard. It's National Fire Protection Agency. What they require is actually how many people you get their house sued and what vehicles you arrive in. So a full response for NFPA is 2 engines and what they call a service vehicle, which could be a ladder truck. In our case, we carry all of our service equipment on a ladder truck. Those vehicles have to arrive within 10 minutes, and you have to have a total of 17 people on scene, which is why with our normal staffing, we won't meet that. Even if we increase our staffing, I don't see us being a 17 personnel daily staffing from a 4 to a 17. That's beyond what we do. And that's where the auto aid comes in. We can use auto aid for Glenpool, Bixby, Tulsa, and actually count them as our staffing for auto aid. So we're working on that piece of it on the fire department side as the auto aid. But even if we got auto aid with all of those cities, 60% of the city would be covered in the NFPA standard. So the rest of the city, we have to look at covering by increasing our staffing and using auto aid together. So that's kind of big pieces together. That kind of makes sense. But the number of people, we haven't actually set yet what that needs to be. And asking more of a budget, I concept and concern with you guys where we need to get to. I have some ideas of where we can get to on staffing, but Staffing, obviously, as you guys know, is very expensive. It's the most expensive part that we do.
Well, good point. So part of the goal of these committees, and this one specifically, is if we can prove, and I don't want to oversimplify this, but if we can prove to these two guys that our insurance, let's theoretically say our ISO rating goes up, our insurance costs go down. If the total savings exceeds the fully loaded cost of the new employee, that's the purpose of this committee. And I know that's things we don't think about very often. But if our insurance savings far exceeds the cost of a new firefighter, then let's have this discussion and let him lead it and report to us whether or not we get to that point where it makes sense to add staffing levels, because we can finally eclipse a new ISO rating, which might save us 3, 5, 10%, whatever the case may be. So probably good to think about if these discussions get to that level, might be a good idea to get some insight from Tedford or whoever holds that insurance for us as to what are we looking at potentially saying, is this a goal even worth achieving? Just to simply go out and add more additional manpower. So,
Glenville City in a 2, they've got a smaller department, fire department, I believe, than we do. Smaller city, but they, because of the size of the city and everything and their response, everything, they meet the criteria for a 2, and that's points ahead of us. So that's obviously a savings. But it's the scary part. You just knowing that, if we have minimal manning level of 4, and I've mentioned this a number of times, but they can be tied up on a structure fire in North Jenks and something happens in Dutcher's Crossing, we're going to rely on Bixby or Glenpool or something to come to our aid, which they have a mutual aid with, but the auto aid is something that would dispatch them immediately and not have to go through the channels.
And Chief, one of the other things that this committee, I hope, is going to ask of you and Chief Arthur in the future, we want to know what your needs are and then what your wants are, and we'll figure out if we can bridge the gap. If you go to bed every night knowing you want 6 people on staff, and we can justify the financial cost of adding the additional personnel and by potentially looking at increased savings on insurance, it's a discussion worth having, because it takes 30 minutes of our time. So that's what I want him to be chasing, is those rabbits. And if that's keeping you up at night, and I've heard about this for people all the time, and it doesn't seem like a reasonable number to me, like a big enough number. But you're the chief, we trust you, so just keep that in mind. And that's the goal of these committees, is to turn over those rocks and make sure we're taking care of all those needs. And that's an example of the kind of briefing I hope all of you guys can provide when we do these committee briefings going forward. So thank you, Councilor Murray. Communications, anything?
Building up some relationships with various HOAs. I'm trying to kind of spiderweb HOAs out of my ward 4. And a lot of those HOAs, I'm trying to get in on meetings, which some are looking at getting back into in-person meetings. Many are not. They're resuming Zoom. I'm sorry, they're going to continue with Zoom HOA meetings down the road, but trying to build up communication lines there. And just through that process, I've had to forward various issues over maybe transportation. We got a lot of speeding going on in the neighborhood out in our area due to the 111 and the Elwood project. So I've reached out to the police department, and that was a pretty big next door issue that I forwarded on and had good results there. Police reached out back to citizens and talked about some signage and some other things there, and also some drainage issues outside of my ward, also moving inside my ward where some projects are going on. So making a lot of good connections there. And I've also been pushing out the City Safe app. And on our early talks when we toured the city, they talked about how we had a very poor response from our citizens on downloading that app and using it. So I'm hoping to let a significant increase in our City Safe app and all the, especially the emergency alerts that go out, especially as tornado season approaches. So making some inroads.
Thank you, Councilor. And my perspective on this committee, having been around here for 4 years, is other objectives that we have is working with Dr. Butter.
Thank you. Dr. Butterfield.
I've got Stacy Butterfield on the brain. Working with Mrs. Butterfield to figure out more ways to communicate with all our citizens that don't involve Instagram, Facebook, and God forbid next door. Social media is probably 80% of what we do, but I go to public safety trade shows all the time, and there are other ways to communicate with people who don't want to stare at their phone, and we need to figure out what they are. The other thought process is no judgment cast here, but after sitting here for 4 years, I've never been accused of not returning a phone call or an email quickly, but most people in this room have. And I would like to for our city, our staff, to find ways to raise the bar on our customer service levels. The things that I hear would never be tolerated in corporate America. And I said earlier, I treat this as a business, and my neighbors are shareholders and they don't want to invest. So let's find ways to work with Katie and Chris Shrout on get innovative and creative on how do we set higher service levels. So, people can honestly say we can change the momentum, and I don't hear, well, I called 3 times and I haven't gotten a call back. You're an elected official now, and we have the authority to help them and help ourselves to change that general attitude. I'd like for us to have a reputation of being very responsive and being quick. And some of those ideas they're not even mine. They come from citizens. If I asked a random person on my street, how do you communicate with the city on an issue with the road? And inevitably I'll go to the website and I'll look for it and I'll find an email address, or they're going to just email the city manager. As a retired military guy, I think it's ridiculous that our city manager or the mayor or vice mayor gets an email about a pothole. That's skipping so many layers of the chain of command. My first thought was, because I talked to one of my neighbors, and he said, you know what would make a lot of sense? What if there was an email address that was streets@jenks.com? I would remember that. So I started asking. I asked 39 people what they thought, and 33 thought it was a really good idea. Streets@jenks.com. Good ideas at jenks.com. Or we can just give him Mr. Shrout's email address and we can overload his inbox. So that's the general idea, is can we get creative and get smarter? And all of those email addresses that are distribution inboxes, this is what corporate America does all day. I very seldom give away my personal email address, only to my best clients. Otherwise, they get a generic inbox that three and four of my colleagues read. And we're all accountable to make sure those emails and calls are returned quickly. So that was the spirit of me coming up with this committee. But I think it's a great idea, though. The HOAs are kind of key. So those are all good things. So I think Mrs. Butterfield and Mr. Shrout are probably good places to add to your, if you want to meet, those are probably good folks to add. And we may even need some IT support to make any of that happen, if you think that's a good idea. And I'm not asking you to believe me, but if you want to do that, then I would probably include IT in that discussion. Yes, sir.
I'm just going to mention that my HOA in your town had a meeting last week, and I attended and spoke as communication.
Great. Last is our city manager review. So this has to be done. I don't really think this is hard. So it doesn't look like, we didn't assign a chair to this because it's not a committee that necessarily meets on a reoccurring basis, but can I ask you to take the lead on that? Okay. If there are many city managers in our county, and most of them have a general job description on our website.
Yeah.
I would encourage you to even ask this gentleman here to provide his own job description, and we can kind of put them all in a pile and come up with the ones that are most applicable to Mr. Shrout. I think if we're going to evaluate somebody, and as a teacher and as a supervisor, we evaluate people based on what they're actually supposed to do at work, not what we think they're supposed to be doing at work. So
this is supposed to be done a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
First did the review. The other thing is that I used to write job descriptions.
Yeah. So
I can get with the surrounding.
We have a job description.
Yeah. So if you provide the job description, you guys like it, let's move forward. And I think maybe the harder part is Counselor Mike Sharp had his own version of a review form that we used 1 year. It was a point system.
Yeah,
I think Mayor Lee probably recreated it. So maybe we could actually get to the point where we create a review system that actually lasts more than 1 year. That would be fantastic too. Something that is fair and agreeable to the one that we're reviewing, but I think we all agree that it's way overdue to do this, so out of
Well, we
respect.
did have COVID last year.
Yeah.
So
I did.
we had the blip.
Was that what happened? We
I
just,
don't know, but we did it the year before.
yeah,
That
Well-
was 2 years ago. So I was part of that.
okay.
So,
Thanks for volunteering.
Thanks for assigning it.
Did I ask about capital projects? Is there anything that's not confidential that you care to?
I think that was, I was just gonna explain. I have a capital project, but I really can't discuss that at the moment. I have a couple of very pressing meetings that have to be completed before I can really publicly disclose anything. So.
All right, well, the air conditioner hasn't been on for very many minutes. It's getting very hot. So unless there's anything else, Counselor Isbell.
Mr. Mayor, could I get a copy, electronic copy of the list of committees, please?
Yes, all you gotta do is show up, brother. You can have all of them you
I
want.
missed one meeting in 2 years.
I'm kidding, I'm kidding. If there's no further comment from the council, we will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a proper motion and a second for adjournment. Let's call the roll, please.
Murray,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Short,
Yes.
Boucher,
Yes.
Isabel.